Warning: portions of this meeting contain graphic descriptions that may be upsetting to some viewers. Watch at your own risk.
Okay, it's 5 o'clock. Thanks for coming, everybody. We'll go ahead and call the special meeting of the Hudsonville Public Schools Board of Education to order. We have all board members present this evening with the exception of our newest board member, Andrew DeWitt, who had some scheduled travel before, already pre-scheduled prior to this meeting being scheduled. So we'll go ahead and start the meeting. So first off, can I have an approval of the agenda, please? A motion to approve the agenda. Motion by Barb Hooper. Support from Mark Davis. Any questions or comments on the agenda? Okay, seeing none, all in favor, please say yes. Opposed, no. Motion carried on the agenda. Next up, we have recognition of visitors and hearing of people present. Again, just a reminder, comments are to be kept to 3 minutes. You may step up to the podium here. There's a timer here. Comments are to be addressed to the Board of Education. And Robin Vandenberg, who's right down here in the front row, will call the names of those who will be speaking to the board this evening. So, Robin, with that.
Keith Lyon-Decker.
Good morning, or afternoon. Last meeting, there are a few teachers that seemed kind of angry that they might be given some direction about the appropriateness of their classroom materials, specifically on books in their classroom libraries that they push and promote to their students. It should not surprise teachers that the district would have a vested interest in the extent of some of the control over this. This administration has no qualms with directing teachers that class parties at the end of December cannot be called Christmas parties, or that the winter break cannot be called Christmas break. Teachers are even required that they can no longer wear jeans on the occasional Friday. So it shouldn't surprise them that the district might want to weigh in on the appropriateness of their books. Specifically, that maybe some of them don't belong in a classroom library. This decision is more about who sets the agenda in the district than it is about this one book. Will teachers be able to set their own agenda by promoting any book in their classroom libraries they wish, or the board set the agenda by choosing the curriculum and teachers promote books and materials to fulfill that curriculum? Clearly, there exist teachers with their own agenda that will push that agenda through the books they promote to their own students. Sometimes those agendas are cross purposes of what the district has for an agenda. This board has the right and the authority and the position to set the agenda. We are calling on you and asking you to do that. And it is for that position to protect all kids in their classrooms about what they're exposed to by their own teachers. Classroom libraries exist for teachers to push those books, promote, expound on, whatever you want to call it, to their kids. And we ask that the board would set some parameters around that and establish control. Thank you.
Thank you for your comments. Next,
Denise Lemon.
Good evening, members of the Hudsonville Public School Board. My name is Denise Lemon, and I'm proud to say that I work here at Hudsonville Public Schools. As a para-interventionist, it is my job and honor to work with at-risk kids here at Hudsonville Public Schools. I'm also a mom of 5 teenagers, 4 of whom attend here at the Hudsonville High School. My amazing husband is so good at reminding me to stay in your lane, meaning watch where you put your focus, your time, and your heart into. Well, my kids, this school is my lane. It is my job as a mom and a child advocate to pay attention to what is happening here in my house, where I work, and where my kids attend school 5 days a week, 7 hours a day. We here at Hudsonville Public Schools are all learning to adjust to today's adolescents and the battles that they are faced with. We are also learning how to raise our kids in a very sexualized culture. I'm standing here to encourage you to please remove the book Half of a Yellow Sun from Hudsonville Public Schools. I don't need to go into the timely dialogue of this highly sexualized book, but let me note that this book paints detailed words of gang rape and sexual relationships throughout this entire book. The American Bar Association states that the exposure to pornography harms children and youth by normalizing sexual violence and creating unrealistic expectations of intimate partners and relationships, and increasing the risk of addiction. And you know what type of addiction I'm talking about. Parts of this book paints a realistic picture that could negatively impact some of your Hudsonville High School kids, whom grow up in similar circumstances, such as my boys who were born and raised in Eastern Africa in their first 7 years of life before we adopted them. That being, if one of my boys would read it, it is very likely it could open up wounds and past trauma for them to deal with, as their families were affected by a similar terrorist group of reference in this book. Being a mom of a multiracial family, I love the idea of having books with African authors. But I assure you that there are many other books with African authors out there that can replace Half of the Yellow Sun. This book allegedly has literary merit that has been criticized as being subjective, since personal taste determines aesthetic value, which is subjective to the eye of the beholder. Let me repeat, the eye of the beholder. Finally, if I were to read Half of a Yellow Sun to you, you would not be able to air it, because it would be against the FCC obscenity laws, because it contains obscene and graphic descriptions of sex. Think about this. If it's deemed inappropriate for the airways, would this be a book that we'd want our children to have access to? Thank you for your time. As like I always say, fire up, go Eagles.
Thank you for your time.
Jeff Dole.
Jeff Dole.
Esteemed board members, my name is Pastor Jeff Dahl. I'm a member of one of the many fine churches here in Hudsonville, Michigan. And I'd like to begin my address by reading 2 portions of Scripture, something that you would hopefully expect from an ordained minister of the Word who lives in the fair city of Hudsonville, Michigan. Whether or not you or anybody here believes it, all Scripture is given by inspiration of God. It is the very Word of God. And because Scripture, also called the Bible, the Word of God, is inspired, it is living and active. It's sharper than any two-edged sword. It has the ability to discern the thoughts and intentions of every human being who has ever lived or is living today. And God, the Holy Spirit who inspired it, will use the several verses of Scripture that I read this afternoon to discern thoughts. And one final note about the living and active Word of God. It can be twisted, it can be altered, it can be rebelled against, it can be ignored, but none of these things make it go away. It's forever fixed in the heavens. Twisting or altering the Word of God, like many false teachers and professors are doing today, as well as rebelling against it or ignoring it, will only add to the eternal condemnation that awaits those who will not turn from their sinful thoughts, words, and deeds and turn to Jesus Christ. Now, the several verses that will be shared. The first is the seventh commandment, which is recorded in Exodus 20, verse 14. You shall not commit adultery. And the second is Hebrews 13, verse 4. Marriage should be honored by all, and the marriage bed kept pure, for God will judge the adulterer and all the sexually immoral. Friends, Almighty God is very serious about adultery and all manner of sexual immorality. God will judge those who are sexually immoral, along with those who promote it. I would read portions of this book to you, but it's so corrupt, I would feel embarrassed to read it to you. There's two reasons I'm present here. One is because I care about you. You'll stand before God on Judgment Day and give an account for the books that you allowed to be on the shelves of this public school. And secondly, I love and care about the children in this community. I care about their souls. I care about their mental, emotional, and social well-being. And books like this will destroy young people. Thank you for your time.
Thank you for your comments. Next item.
Janet Gandy. Jenny Gamby.
Good evening. I love books and reading. Reading is beneficial in so many ways. Here are some good ways books can positively affect our lives. It strengthens the brain, increases empathy, builds vocabulary, prevents cognitive decline, reduces stress, aids sleep, alleviates depression. When we read, research has proven our minds change and evolve. It is amazing how powerful our minds are and how complex God created them. Now keep in mind specifics from Half of a Yellow Sun as you hear about a few things that happen to our minds when we read. Reading about experiences is almost the same as living them. Let me repeat that. Reading about experiences is almost the same as living them. You create photos in your mind, even without being prompted. New languages can grow your brain. Research shows the brain does not differentiate much between reading about an experience and practicing or witnessing it in life. In both cases, the same nerve regions are stimulated. So, is this book introducing high school students to experiences they should be living by reading Half of a Yellow Sun? High school students are adolescents. An adolescent is defined as a young person who is developing into an adult, one who is emotionally or intellectually immature. Adolescence is also a time for rapid cognitive development. The thoughts, ideas, and concepts developed at this period of life greatly influence one's future life, playing a major role in character and personality formation. Is this book greatly influencing high school adolescents in a positive way for their future? Also, there's a movie based on the book, Half of a Yellow Sun, and it is rated R for violence and sexual content. If the movie, which is based upon the book, is rated R, is it appropriate for minors to be reading? Please remove this book from Hudsonville Public Schools. Choose books that will build helpful vocabulary, increase empathy, and strengthen the brain in a more constructive way. This is one of the many reasons my kids are no longer at HPS, because common sense alone tells us we should not be allowing minor students to be reading this book. Thank you.
Thank you for your comment.
Matt Naderveld. Matt Naderveld.
So we have many expectations and standards at our schools, like dress codes, student athletic codes, and how students should act in classrooms, hallways, parking lots. We even have standards for meetings like tonight. But I'm sure there are some standards for textbooks too. We wouldn't dream of bringing in a math book that says 2 + 2 = 5. we set those standards to guard what goes into our minds, we would be irresponsible if we did anything less. But this is not just about what we let into our minds. This is also about what we let into our hearts. So I'll be honest, I was sitting on the sidelines on this one. When I heard about it, I was thinking, you know, it can't be that bad. It can't be, maybe it's just some people were misinformed about the book and got a little too fired up about it. Then I read the content of the book, and now I'm pretty fired up about it. There's no way our school should be offering this kind of content to our kids. It's irresponsible. And just a reminder, this is nothing new. In the Bible, the Apostle Paul wrote a letter to the Philippian church about guarding their hearts and minds. He said to them, whatever is true, whatever is true, whatever is honorable, whatever is just, whatever is pure, whatever is lovely, whatever is commendable. If there's anything worthy of praise, think about these things. So I fail to see how books with this kind of content offer any of these honorable or pure things. Let's do the right thing. Let's fight together for the hearts of our kids. And set some standards for things like this. Thank you.
Thank you for your comment.
Good evening. My name is Greg Chansky, and I've lived in this district for 30 years. As a current candidate for the Hudsonville School Board, I have been speaking and communicating with hundreds of voters. After interacting with many parents and teachers, I don't believe that a representative process would have unanimously recommended keeping this book in our schools. The cynical part of me thinks that the process resulting in a 9-0 vote was meant to send a message to parents. Don't you dare question what we have decided to put in your child's library. This is not an issue of censorship, as some would contend. This issue centers around our community standards and what is appropriate for our children. Having high moral standards does not mean we live in a backward community. It doesn't mean that we are intellectually inferior. It means that we have virtuous and ethical standards that strive to keep our school district away from questionable conduct and content. That is why Hudsonville has always been a destination school district for families. For those who argue that we must ready our children for a global community, I fully agree. Let's do so by concentrating on higher educational standards with more time spent on math, science, history, and writing so they can compete in the marketplace. There is no reason to expose any of our community, let alone our children, to the graphic depictions found in this book. It is clear the book review process needs to be changed to put the emphasis on screening books prior to them being added to the district library and classrooms. However, your decision tonight is not about that process. No board member should be making their decision based on the process as the reason for their vote. The question to be answered is clear. Should this book be a part of the literature offered to our students in Hudsonville? Does this book have any redeeming value that outweighs the frequent graphic scenes of masturbation, oral sex, and graphic violent rape? There are few instances in the life where people's decisions provide a clear view into what they really believe and stand for. For our board members, today's decision is one of those life-defining moments. I pray that you have the wisdom, discernment, and most of all the courage to make the right decision. As a board member, you may not have signed up for a moment such as this, but that does not matter now. What matters is who you are, what you believe, and your willingness to act on that belief. This is no longer about millages and bonds and rubber stamps on educational recommendations. This is about the soul of our community. This is about Hudsonville schools and what they are going to be.
Thank you for your comments,
It
Mr.
starts here.
Thank you for your comments.
Jonathan Stovall. Jonathan Stovall.
I know this is a passionate topic, but if the applause continues at this level, we will take a 10-minute recess. I mean, I don't mind applause. I don't mind applause, but if it keeps going on in the room, it drags on. I understand your desire and passion, but let's be respectful of all the speakers, please. Thank you.
Thank you for the opportunity to speak tonight. I'd like to start off with several questions.
I'm sorry, sir. Your name again is?
Jonathan Scoville.
Thank you.
Thank you for the opportunity. I'd like to start off with several questions and then kind of finish up with some general comments. What is the desired takeaway from reading this book? Everything that we do professionally should have a purpose. So what is the purpose for having kids read this book? Considering the level of controversy surrounding this book, what makes it worth fighting for? Are there other books that would accomplish the same purpose without the controversy? Or is this goal to push the boundaries? What is the line that you as a committee won't cross? Is it the quantity of sexual acts? Is it the graphic nature of the sexual acts? Is it a combination of the two? Or so long as it's well written, it's good to go? Can you give an example of a book that was rejected for being inappropriate? So I kind of struggled with what's talked about today. I talked to my mom. She was an elementary teacher for 30 plus years. She mentioned that in order to teach reading comprehension to students, that you have to teach them to build word pictures in your head as you read. Essentially, your mind makes its own movie as you read. So when you have a minor read a book that has graphic sexual content, you're forcibly injecting sexual explicit images into their underage brains. Stating that there was a sex act allows the brain to acknowledge that it happened, process any significance on the story, and move on. Explaining in descriptive detail forces the reader to visualize the act whether they want to or not. One final comment as a parent. It's been stated that we don't know what the author's intent was, but as a parent, I really don't care about the author's intent. I care about the effect that the author's product has on my child. I really can't figure out how this book betters my child or any child for that matter. Words have weight regardless of their intent. So bringing it back to the beginning, what is the purpose of having kids read this book? Thank you.
Thank you for your comments. Next slide.
Lisa Bosch.
Good evening. My husband and I have 3 sons attending Hudsonville High School. I want to first thank you for having this meeting and appeal process tonight. As you recall, this all began last school year. Half of the Yellow Sun was on a book club list, one of 10 choice books for 21st century literature. My son was placed in a small group to read this book. We received a consent form with a title and author. We couldn't find any content online except a couple concerning things, so we reached out to the teacher. The teacher followed policy by offering us another book after knowing our concerns. Thank you. We decided, though, to proceed with caution. It's hard to judge a book without the content. Plus, what student wants his parents denying the consent form and pulling him from his group? It's embarrassing. However, we were shocked when we read through the book. The sexual encounters are frequent and come across as recreational and risk-free. Masturbation, oral sex, sexual intercourse, graphic rape, sexual fantasy, erections, and nudity are all described. We contacted the teacher and met with the principal and assistant principal. No one claimed this book was inappropriate. We were repeatedly told that there are parents who are okay with this material. We submitted a reconsideration of texts. The administration and staff met and decided to replace the book on the book club list due to age appropriateness and educational outcomes. We thank you. But then added the copies to the classroom libraries without consent forms. We and other parents appealed this decision, and thus the book review committee was formed. To our dismay, the committee chose to keep the book where it is, even though 16 of the 27 listed concerns involved the sex content. It was noted that sex was woven into the plot of the book. It was noted that difficulty reading the explicit violent rape. Noted that maturity was required for the many sexual snippets, but decided to keep it in the classrooms for students to read. This is not just about this one book. This is about setting a boundary of what's age appropriate. If a book with this content can make it onto a book club list, what other content is in our school? We have great teachers here. I can attest to that. This is a leadership and policy issue, and that is why this is a board issue. This is a good school district that has made an error, and good school districts fix their errors. We are asking you to do the right thing. This has nothing to do with diversity in literature. This is about giving students sexually explicit adult content. It is one thing for a student to seek this out, this kind of content on their own. It's another to hand it to them. Your role is to represent our community and protect the welfare of these students in common decency. We ask you to remove these sexually explicit books. We are trying to raise gentlemen that respect and protect the young ladies that they walk the hallways with, and we need your help.
Thank you for your comments.
Lee DeHuff.
Good evening. I'll try to be brief. I encourage the board to say no to this book, Half of Yellow Sun. And any book that's like that should be removed from the libraries and the classrooms of Hudsonville schools. I've heard it argued that on the basis of the First Amendment to the Constitution, that we should permit such things. And I thought about that, and the First Amendment must have limits. The First Amendment would say somebody can write a book like this here in America. That's fine. Somebody can publish the book here in America. That's okay too. But when you buy that book and you put it into a school library or a school classroom, you're making a spiritual, moral decision. And that decision is wrong. It has no place there. I'm sure that everybody would agree that we want safe schools. You want the cafeteria food to be safe. Nobody in his right mind, thinking clearly, would go to Gennings Hardware and buy something that would eliminate rodents in the household and bring it and put it in the school cafeterias. Well, what we're talking about here are spiritual dangers. But many people, when it comes to spiritual things, don't speak clearly. They don't think clearly. The problem with porn is it is addictive. It hardens the hearts, and it has no place in the reading of young people, or adults for that matter. And it often leads to sin in other forms. We want safe schools. We want to keep our children safe. Please vote tonight to remove this book. Thank you.
Thank you for your comments.
Jennifer Daugherty. Jennifer Daugherty.
Good evening. My name is Jennifer, and I want to start by saying thank you for allowing this appeal to happen. I do believe the decision should fall with you. It also gives the parents there's a lot of concerned parents. This is a small fraction. A lot of us couldn't get out before 5 o'clock to make it here on time. So thank you to the people who showed up. What is shared this evening will illustrate that this book rises to the level of sexually explicit, and we should be concerned about what we put in front of our minors. My fear is that we are going to look at this and say, well, we have these book guidelines. And I would like to share from personal experience that these are not always followed. Last year, my daughter was a sophomore, and in her English class, she was sent home with a book before I ever saw a consent form. When I questioned it, she said, well, I forgot to give it to you. And I'm sure she's not the only one. Kids, they forget things. But not once did the teacher reach out to me through voicemail, phone, text, email, and I'm available. I would have been happy to, sign that consent form, ask her for it. Instead, the teacher put it in her possession. If we can't trust that the educators are going to follow the guidelines, then yeah, I just have questions about this. So I don't want us to say, hey, we have guidelines, just know that they're not always followed. And speaking of guidelines, that wouldn't even apply to this particular situation. This is not a book club book anymore, thank goodness. But it does sit in the classroom library where my daughter sat, where a freshman was also in that class. And there's no consent form needed to bring that home. At the heart of this appeal, you have concerned parents wanting what's best for their kids, and I do believe most of our educators, not all, want what's best for our kids. I don't think this book is it, and there have to be other alternatives that can accomplish the same goals. I hope that you, our board, also have the best interest of our students at heart and will vote to remove this book from the classrooms. Thank you.
Kendra Wenzel.
I'm going to start with an excerpt from the book. The bar girl was lying on her back on the floor, her wrapper bunched up at her waist, her shoulders held down by a soldier, her legs wide ajar. She was sobbing, please, 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 Bika. Her blouse was still on. Between her legs, High-Tech was moving. His thrusts were jerky. The soldiers were cheering. On the floor, the girl was still. Uwu pulled his trousers down, surprised at the quickness of his erection. She was dry and tense when he entered her. He did not look at her face or at the man pinning her down or at anything at all as he moved quickly and felt his own climax. The rush of fluids to the tips of himself, a self-loathing release. He zipped up his trousers while some soldiers clapped. Online Book Looks has rated Half of a Yellow Sun as not for minors. It also comes with a content warning that states if you are under the age of 18, please exit now. The American Academy of Pediatrics found that media exposure, including books, can have an impact on students by transferring violence to them. When students are exposed to graphic materials, psychological reaction can occur later, such as violence, more casual sexual partners, and sex at a much younger age. This exposure can lead to sensitivity problems. The things they are reading and looking at are no longer hardcore enough, violent enough, or twisted enough, and they escalate, looking for things that are more sexually explicit and vulgar. Let's look at the statistics. RAINN reports 1 in 3 girls and 1 in 33 boys experience sexual assault, molestation, or rape. 5% are under the age of 9, 16 are under 12, 38% are 12 to 14, and 46 are 15 to 17, are high schoolers. Do you know how I know this to be true? Because I grew up with this happening to me. I was sexually abused and raped by a teenage 16-year-old boy when I was 12. My mouth was covered by his hands as he held me down. Sorry. I later learned that it all started with him reading excessively vulgar books that were pornographic, and it went from there. I want you to remember those graphic pictures of a helpless child being assaulted and raped in your minds, because by leaving these sexually explicit and vulgar books in our libraries or classroom, that makes you personally responsible for those children that statistically will be held down and raped and molested. When you hear about these things happening on the news that shock you, look within, please. It starts with you and the decisions you make for our children. Remember those faces, and I pray that it is not one day one of your children or grandchildren that cowers at your love, your touch, or your hugs. This does not just affect their childhood, it affects them well into their adulthood lives as well. For the sake of our children, please say no to half of a yellow sun.
Rebecca Skipper.
Last year, I and many of my secondary colleagues received a form email taken from an advocacy website. This form email asked for the classroom teacher to share all texts read in our particular classes. Some of the parents in attendance here tonight sent those emails. The logic for this, despite all Hudsonville Public Schools curriculum being online, was to be sure that I wasn't allowing their child to read something they didn't approve of. I invited each parent to a phone call or an in-person conversation, as it is tough to read tone in an email. And it was also an attempt to foster understanding and have a conversation about what their children were reading. Not one person responded to me. One has to wonder about these requests to ban non-required books that seniors were reading. What would happen if the same diligency was applied to keeping children off smartphones, streaming services, and the internet? Nonetheless, tonight you will make a decision that will, with one swift motion, decide which direction you want to send our district. It is so much bigger than just one book. Will you be a district that defers to people who perhaps never sat down with a teacher? A district that negates the work of its staff? A district that refuses to take a stand for all kids? Will you set precedent that will open doors for challenges and threats for other curriculum? Who's to say somebody won't want to challenge the teaching of the Holocaust? Who's to say someone won't want to challenge our science curriculum? Will you subvert a code of conduct to keep a few at bay? Will you, with one board action, convey a lack of faith in your staff, who diligently carry out all your board policies? Or will you decide that the experiences of all kids matter? Will you decide that your parent and staff volunteers on various book committees are valuable, thoughtful, and necessary? Will you conclude that if a parent has given permission for her child to read a book, then it's not incumbent on another parent to regulate that decision? Ultimately, where will you stand? Behind educators who have poured their hearts into this district, who have worked to know their students, who have learned best practices and have devoted a lifetime to these students? Or will you abandon us and the work we do? One board member running for re-election shared in a screening and recommendation 2 weeks ago that, quote unquote, teachers never ask us, the board, for anything. We are today. Will you stand for us? Will you defend our work? Will you support us publicly in word and in action? Thank you.
Thank you for your comments. Next, Robin.
Virginia Greenlee.
Book has no value.
I'm sorry, ma'am. What was your name again?
My name is Jen Greenlee. I'm on the board of Muskegon Pregnancy Services. For as a man thinketh, so is he. What you feed your mind, you become in time. What in the world do we want to be feeding into the minds of our youth? Do you not realize that the culture is already stealing the hearts and minds of children everywhere? And we have now seen the radical left infiltrate with their agenda all 7 mountains of societal influence, including this mountain of education where every school is a part of. By not speaking up and stepping up prior to now, The sin of silence has caught up with us. Consequences have been and are being reaped. We've seen it with people that are being raped. As part of the Pregnancy Services Board, we know with crisis pregnancies come through, it didn't happen overnight. We've come to the point where we need to have boundaries and say enough is enough. When our kids are young, we're teaching them what is right and wrong. But we're all given a conscience to know within ourselves from God what is really right or wrong. We've already been told that our Constitution was made for moral and religious people. Do we want to steal that morality? Do we want to steal that religious belief in having respect for God who created every one of us? We can sear our kids' consciences. We can sear society and say, whatever you want to do that feels good, do it. However, we are losing the discernment to know what is good and true and holy and pure and of good report that God put in us. Why do we want to settle for undermining the capacity of people to become holistic and harmonious with the fulfillment that God designed? Age appropriateness cannot be ignored. Material requires mature minds to assess and evaluate, especially when immature minds cannot or are not yet able to discern for themselves. You can be sure sin will take anyone farther than they want to go, keep anyone longer than they want to stay, and cost anyone and society more than they want to pay. What do we want to facilitate? More immorality, lack of self-control, sexual stimulation, lack of respect for a holy God, to whom we will all answer someday. There's only one name that's the name above all names, and that name is Jesus. And every person will bow to that name.
Amen.
Thank you, ma'am.
So questionable books,
Thank
you
you.
need to decide.
David Cotman. David Cotman. Mike Anderson.
Good evening. My name is Mike Anderson. I'm the English Department Chair at Hudsonville High School. Books are the reason we're here. That might seem like an obvious statement, but I'm not yet referring to this evening's proceeding. Rather, I'm referring to part of the motivation, the passion that drives many of the teachers in this audience and in our classrooms at HPS. We, of course, became teachers because we find purpose in helping students be successful, but for those of us fortunate enough to call ourselves English teachers, one of the ways we can do that is by sharing our love of books and learning from those texts. This board established a book review committee to review challenges to the inclusion of individual texts in our school and classroom libraries. And the members of that committee executed their charge with integrity, professionalism, and fidelity to the academic and legal guidance that must inform such work. I implore the board to diligently consider their laudable efforts this evening. In a public institution such as ours, providing access to a variety of literature is a moral obligation of our profession. We do not mandate the reading of any piece of literature beyond those established in board-approved curricula, but to prevent all students and families in our district access to certain titles simply because some members of the community disapprove of them, even though neither those members of the community nor any students are required to read them, and though permission slips are required to read them for book clubs, that is a dangerous proposition. Furthermore, I contend that the act of banning books is anathema to the purpose of our profession and indeed anathema to the concept of democracy itself. Thank you for your time. Thank you for your time. Okay, well, we conclude our public comment for this evening. Thank you all for your comments. Okay. Now we move to the book appeal procedure. So just by way of context, for those that are here this evening, the book appeal procedure approach is based very much on the same lines as a disciplinary hearing that the board occasionally has to participate in. A difference is a disciplinary hearing is conducted in a closed session, obviously because of the rights of the student. This book review committee appeal will occur in open session, obviously. Just to kind of frame this, the outcome of the appeal process will be to accept or reject the findings of the book review committee. Again, very much similar, it's exactly similar to a disciplinary hearing. The approach will be just as it is for the expulsion hearing. The administrative team will present process and findings of the book review committee. The parent, in this case Ms. Brugink, will present information disputing those findings. The board will ask questions of the administration and the parent, have dialogue about the book review committee outcomes, and then a motion and action will be taken to either accept the book review committee outcomes as is, accept the outcomes with certain modifications that we ask the administrative team to implement, or reject the outcomes of the book review committee process and reconvene to investigate other options. So that's the outline of the approach we'll be taking this evening. So with that, I will turn it over to Ms. Taylor, who will kick us off on the book review committee and the outcomes.
Can you hear me? Is that microphone on? Okay. So we have been invited here this evening to talk about the process that we followed to review the book based on the reconsideration of text forms that we received. In your packet, you will find a copy of the PowerPoint, but you'll certainly, board, be able to follow along here as well. Within your packet, you will also find all of the explicit examples of the paperwork that was completed by the review committee, etc. And I'll be walking you through each of those individually. Here this evening are a few members of our committee, and I would just invite them to take a moment to introduce themselves a little bit for context, to get to know who they are and their role in this process.
Hi there. My name is Dana Vanderlift. I've worked in Hudsonville for the last 17 years. I grew up here in Hudsonville, went to Forest Grove Elementary, and back when I was Hudsonville Junior High, high school. I taught 8th grade English for 13 years, and I've worked in the curriculum office for the last 5 years. And I've also worked as an adjunct professor at Hope College.
Hi, I'm Holly Banninga. I've lived in Hudsonville for 13 years, but I've been a part of the West Michigan community my whole life. I have 3 kids here in the Hudsonville system, 1 senior boy, a sophomore boy, and then an 8th grade girl. And I have a degree in physical therapy as well as an MBA, and I work in a healthcare facility here in our community. And I'm grateful to be here today to talk about our process.
My name is Christy Jensen. I was one of the parent representatives on the committee as well. I have 3 young adult children now. They were recent graduates of Hudsonville High School. They spent their entire career here. I have my CPA as well as my accounting degree. I work for a global manufacturer here in West Michigan. And prior to that, a CPA firm, but have lived in West Michigan for about 25 years now.
So as I mentioned, we are here to talk about the process that we followed. At the beginning of this process, last fall, I was charged with developing a process for families if they were requesting reconsideration of a text. And so working really hard to develop an objective process ensuring that all voices were heard within the committee, and creating a process that I feel actually very strong about here this evening, and sharing that process with you. The timeline, as you can see in front of you, starts back at the end of January, where 2 parents submitted a request for reconsideration of a text form at the building level, and that is from a process perspective. You heard a couple parents speak tonight about the process when they are not in support of a child or their child reading a book club book. And so these parents, one parent who submitted paperwork actually did reach out and attempt to have a conversation, or did have a conversation with the teacher, and the teacher recommended, let's just find another text for your student. And the parent proceeded to say, no, we'll go ahead and keep the student reading the book, but then got into that and continued, or changed their mind, and then the teacher just did work with them to find a different book. And that's not a new process, I want to point that out. That's what our teachers have always done, are currently doing, and will continue to do, is to come alongside any family at any level and ensure that they are comfortable with the books that their student is reading, whether that be a library book or a book club book. As you can see from the timeline, or let me speak a little bit to the timeline of when the reconsideration of text information was completed by the parents. At that time, we noted that there were 2 students who did receive parent permission to read that book as part of a book club list in 21st Century Lit. And that is a 11th and 12th grade class. And those 2 students who had given permission, we felt, after receiving the reconsideration of text forms, as well as some of the comments at board meetings, that we wanted to reach out to the families who'd already given their students permission to read the book and share what the community, some community members were saying about their concerns about the book. And so Mr. Beal, I was actually in his office when he made the phone call, but Mr. Beal reached out to the 2 parents of young ladies who were currently reading the book, was very honest with them and transparent about what some individuals in the community, what their concerns were about the book, having sexually explicit material in them, in that book. And at that time, both of those parents did say that they wanted their student to continue reading the book, that they were okay with that. As that part of the process continued, as you'll see in your packet, there are on the screen in front of you, that is the process. This process is linked on our website, as well as shared then when parents reach out to the building principal to share a concern. And so this packet was given to both of these parents, and they completed the forms and turned them in. The process then is to move forward with having a building team make a decision based on reviewing the parents' concerns on the forms, and pulling together, so administrators at the high school at that time pulled together teachers who were familiar with the book and made the determination that they would replace the book on the book club list with another title, and that they were comfortable leaving the book on library shelves at that time. That was communicated to parents at that time. Parent A then requested an appeal to the building decision to allow half of a Yellow Sun to remain on library shelves. And so that was what then sparked the review committee to be formed. From a committee development standpoint, I received a list from our high school administration of our AP Literature class list, so the students who were currently in an AP Lit class, and really just started going down the list in alphabetical order until I found parents who were willing to serve in this capacity, knowing that the expectation would be that they would need to read the book in its entirety. It's about a 600-page book, quite complex text, and complex themes. And so it took a bit to find some parents who were willing to engage on the review committee, but that is how I proceeded. So we then moved forward with me as the Assistant Superintendent of Curriculum and Instruction as the facilitator, not a voting member,
a curriculum office representative, a building level administrator, 2 teachers, and eventually 3 parents. So at the onset, it was 2 parents willing to join. And then from a process perspective, I will share with you in a moment how we ended up with 3 parents on the committee that's further down on the timeline. The 2 parents who were originally invited to the committee, we met via Zoom to go over the process. And really the big ideas of this were to highlight some key pieces. I shared with them professional reviews of the book that was shared in an email, which you'll find in your packet. They must read the book in its entirety and take notes. You can see that note page is there. They were asked to make as many copies as they needed in order to capture their notes as evidence of reading the book in its entirety and following the process, and to bring them to the meeting where we would officially review the book. Also, there was additional legal guidance that would be shared prior to the final meeting for their review. That legal guidance is in your packet as well, and that was vetted with our attorneys. And then finally, one of the big ideas of the meeting on February 17th was to discuss the final meeting agenda and processes for final recommendations. Really stressing that I was working to create an objective process where all voices would be honored, and creating a process where confidentiality would be key, in that if they had any concerns about that. At that time, there was a lot of social media traction, if you will, and wanting to protect anybody that was sitting at the table in front of all of you now, but wanting to protect them from any potential judgment of others, no matter what their stance was when we got to the review part of the process. We set a date at that time for a final review on March 24th. You will notice this was in your packet. This is a link to all of the research and links to various ways that they could find professional reviews of the book that was shared with them after that meeting. This was also shared with them as far as a sample of the report for the committee that I would be submitting to the board, trying to again share with them that they would not be named, and they would not be named in regard to what their vote was, that would be confidential, and I'll explain how that process occurred during that meeting in a moment. On 3/21, I received an email from a parent who, due to some unforeseen medical reasons, needed to withdraw. We were scheduled to meet on March 24th, and on the 21st, she unfortunately had to reach out and decline her participation due to a recent medical diagnosis. At that time, I reached out to the parents who recommended or appealed the building level decision, and let them know that we were going to need more time in order to bring more people onto the committee in order to read the book in its entirety. And so then we set a meeting date of the end of April with spring break included in there, etc. From a procedural perspective, I used the same AP literature list to invite 2 new parents for a total of 3 parents. So we started with 2 parents. One parent withdrew a few days before we were planning to meet, and at that point I thought 3 parents is probably the best bet, because that gets us in a situation where had we started with 3 parents, then we might not have had to restart. So that was the intent of adding 2 additional parents at that time. I then met with the 2 new members to share information from that original meeting, which was on that February 17th day, to go over what the process would be, what the expectations were in regard to reading the entire book, taking notes, etc., and brought them up to speed at that time. From a committee meeting process, we started, this is the slide deck from that meeting, but We started really from a process of setting some norms around confidentiality, again, wanting to honor and create a safe space for everybody to have whatever opinions they had after reading the entire book, and creating a safe space where we could have dialogue and open communication with one another. We really grounded in process from there then, reviewing the reconsideration of text document, which was the parents' document. You also have that in your packet with their attached concerns regarding the book. We also discussed the text, both pros and cons. We did a sticky note activity, so it was really a protocol, again, around ensuring that all voices were heard. And I'll walk you through what that looked like. So I asked each member, their notes page was taking notes on the merits and positives of the book, as well as the challenges and any potential concerns of the book. And so when we met as a committee, I asked each individual member to take a look at the notes that they had brought with them and to individually write down on a sticky note each idea that they wanted to communicate from their notes, merits and positives of the book, as well as challenges and concerns. And so it was just an independent activity where each of them wrote on a separate sticky each of their merits and positives, as well as their challenges and concerns on sticky notes. And then I paired them up. This was done ahead of time, where I just simply passed out who their partners would be, and they were color partners and shape partners. And they were paired up then with a partner, and they shared their sticky notes, both verbally, but then also they traded sticky notes. Again, this was in an effort to create a space where during whole group discussion, we were not going to be creating a situation where I was uncomfortable sharing my notes, but it actually ended up being two people removed. So I'll walk you through an example. Dana and I would meet, we would talk, just the two of us, we would trade sticky notes. So I would share all my merits and positive sticky notes with her. She would do the same. Literally, we would trade positive as well as the challenges and concerns about the book. Then we moved from a color partner to a shape partner. So then I may be with Miss Jensen, for an example, for my second partner, and we would do the same thing. So she now has someone else's stickies, and so do I, and then we walk through the same process. At the conclusion of that activity, then we came together as a full committee and shared out what were on the sticky notes. Again, trying to create a safe space where all opinions, all voices were honored, and that there wasn't a situation where anybody would be uncomfortable with sharing an opinion that might be the same or different than somebody else's. You will see that complete list of those challenges and merits of the book right from the sticky notes. Those were not altered in any way. That complete list is attached to the board report that was given to you in April, and it is in your packet as well. So there's the rubric as well as about 3 or 4 pages of those particular notes. Next, we moved into materials review. I had shared the 9-page document that is in your packet regarding HPS guidelines, practices, and guidance document, and we did a protocol called Lift a Line. And Lift a Line is simply where we, as a full committee, I asked the committee members to walk through that document. They received it ahead of time and were asked to read it, and just to go around the circle and lift items from each segment of that document that were pertinent or relevant to them, that really spoke to them, or an idea that they wanted to make sure that the entire committee reviewed. Again, it is a lengthy document. It's 9 pages, and there are lots of details in there in regard to practices and guidance, as well as legal case law, etc. And again, our attorney did help us with that document. So that lift a line, we went around and again just elevated everything out of that document that the committee wanted to make sure that we were considering as we moved into the next part of the process. We reviewed again that there's 3 different scenarios with 3 different purposes of how students access books in our classrooms. One is a whole class reading. That is considered curriculum. So as an example, that would be To Kill a Mockingbird, for example. That is a board-approved book, and that is considered part of curriculum.
There are also book club lists or book club reading, which originally that is where Half of the Yellow Suns started, was on that book club list. However, the book at the time of the committee was really looking at the book as a library book. The building level decision was what was appealed, and the building level decision was to keep it on library shelves. And so that was part of what we were looking at as a committee. So that would be the independent choice reading, whether it's a classroom library shelf or a building library shelf. The committee meeting process then, we again reviewed the parent challenge, the documents that they had shared. We discussed the text, both the pros and the cons. We walked through the legal guidance and kind of some of the core beliefs as a district around reading. And I would highlight a couple of those. Number 5 in that process is that we believe that it's important for parents to have a voice regarding literature choices for their child. And I would say that that really crosses all 3 areas of that reading. Teachers here in the audience, as well as throughout the district, would say that they are often, or have in the past, also experienced times when parents did not want their child for any particular reason to read a board-approved book. And teachers always come alongside families and help them work through that and ensure that it is best for their child. We as educators can't know all of the things about all of our students and what trauma they may have in the past or any triggers, and so we want to work with families. So that is one of our core beliefs. Teachers are eager and knowledgeable and gracious in that. They always have been, they currently are, and they will continue to be. And then number 6 on our core beliefs is that we really seek to serve all students in a student body with varying needs. That could be academic needs, emotional needs, whatever that means is what I mean, all varying needs. Students need access to a wide range of books due to their varied life experiences and social identities. Reading levels and interests, we often say students need books that provide windows and mirrors. That was first coined back in 1988 by Emily Stiles, that students need windows into the world that may look different than where they sit in their current world as a, in this case, 17 or 18-year-old junior or senior. But they also need mirrors. They need mirrors to see themselves in the books as well. Those are 2 key core beliefs I would lift from that. At that time then, the committee was asked to complete the rubric. We walked through each area of the rubric, ensuring that there was clarity about what that process looked like and what their role was in that. And then they unanimously voted and folded the rubric in half and set it on a table. So there were no names on that ballot, again, trying to honor ensuring that everybody had a safe space to vote however they believed was best based on reading the book in its entirety, following the process, and reviewing the HPS guidelines and legal guidance. We also took some time at the end, because this was the first time we had ever walked through this process, to spend a little, I took time with the committee to talk about what went well through this process and what could be improved. That's a space that we all live as educators, and we often ask that of students, and I asked that of our review committee. Positives were that it was a good structure, expectations were clear, Zoom was helpful to explain the process, so that was in that initial meeting on February 17th. Guidance document with many resources was helpful, inclusion of parents of the students, the age of which would be potentially reading the book, and then committee size, 7 was a good number. As far as improvements, a suggestion was to share clarity around which lenses we are looking through when we consider challenges with the text. So being clear with committee members, am I just looking through my own lens? Am I looking at some students or some parents? And the response to that, which we discussed that evening, was that the parents were representing all of the committee, or all of the community. They were serving as parent representatives, stakeholders, part of that stakeholder group, and teachers, an administrator, and a curriculum office, so really looking through all lenses. Finally, another improvement was consider expanding the process to include multiple requests for reconsideration before forming a committee. There was lots of time involved in this process, and so that was a recommendation. And then finally, consider including the guidelines document with the reconsideration of text form to ensure parents understand First Amendment rights related to books. On 4/25/22, I then presented the rubric and the full report of what the decision was. It was a unanimous decision by the committee to keep the book where it currently was, and that was on library shelves. As mentioned earlier, attached to that report were also the merits and positives, as well as challenges and concerns. In July of 2022, so that presentation was made in April. In July, parent B, so parent A was the first parent who made the appeal to the building level decision to keep the book on library shelves. Another parent then appealed to the Board of Education. The board communicated at that time in July that we were working on board policy that would be in a potential addition, which was then board approved in August, which is then how the board proceeded with this appeal process at this time. Committee members' approximate hours dedicated to this process. If you look up the audio version of Half of a Yellow Sun, it states that the book is approximately 18 hours and 10 minutes. We know readers read faster and slower, but that's just a frame of reference. This was a dense text. It was a dense text. Introduction to the process committee meeting was an hour. Review committee final recommendation meeting was an hour and a half. Review of professional resources, approximately an hour, and review of the HPS guidelines document. So we're talking almost 23 hours. The committee was very committed to this process, and we're all in when we met. At this time, there are some committee members who, due to wanting to remain anonymous, have asked that I read their comments. I was a teacher on the committee to review Half of a Yellow Sun and determine whether the books should be allowed to remain on school and classroom shelves for student checkout. We were tasked with thinking of the work as a whole, not separate excerpts without context. Considering that, there is no way that a majority of readers would call this book as a whole pornographic. We reviewed legal definitions and guidelines for this. There are so many complex global, cultural, historical, and human issues contained in this book. Legal guidelines helped compel the unanimous vote to keep the book available to students. We discussed how we interpreted the book, committee processes, and legal guidelines. But we did not share with each other how we would vote prior to the voting process, nor did we discuss during the voting process. There was certainly no conspiring to achieve a certain voting result. We didn't even know the vote had been unanimous until it was reported out at the subsequent board meeting by Ms. Taylor. In deciding unanimously to keep the book on shelves, we aren't saying the book is for every reader or student. Students have a choice to access books in school libraries, and teachers in classrooms can help guide choices made from those shelves. Parents can and should definitely talk with their kids as they feel necessary about their reading choices, just as they should regarding their viewing and clicking choices. Speaking to this appeal process, members of the committee agreed to volunteer, knowing their names would remain confidential. Board Policy 9130 specifically states that during the review process, the Board of Education has a duty to protect its staff from unnecessary harassment. It's a definite concern that removing the protection of confidentiality for these staff members could subject them to unnecessary harassment or worse from members of the community who disagree with the committee's decision. In fact, some members of the committee have already had uncomfortable experiences after meetings around the public, experiences which district superiors felt warranted the involvement of law enforcement last spring. Further, in agreeing to participate in the original book committee work, read a book over 500 pages long, take notes, attend meetings, study legal guidelines, and weigh important decisions with the team, I did not anticipate nor agree to put additional time in for this appeal process. Though I appreciate the willingness to hear from the original committee, this additional time and effort is a lot to ask, particularly in this format. It just leads to a lot of questions rather than answers for many. Why doesn't the board conduct the appeal by going through a review of the process, committee notes it already has access to, and consult a lawyer through the process?
Does this open the district up to a lawsuit if the committee decision is overruled and legal guidelines ignored? Does the board even value the committee work and the people who volunteer to do it? Will anyone be likely to volunteer for this committee work in the future? I don't have the answers, but I have questions and concerns. I just don't honestly know why we would conduct an appeal process this way, or at all. I know transparency is a goal, but this approach, which feels like putting a book or a committee of volunteers on trial, is not the way. Teacher number 2. I am a teacher who volunteered to serve on the book review committee of Half of a Yellow Sun in the spring of 2022. The committee met in the evenings to discuss the important process, group member expectations, and potential outcomes. All members committed to reading the 500-plus page novel that presents complex themes. At the conclusion of the process, we met to discuss in detail both the challenges and merits of the book. We reviewed HPS guidelines alongside comprehensive legal guidance. Committee members submitted thorough note sheets that were mulled over during the review. Through this process, all members were guaranteed confidentiality. None of this is new information. The process has been outlined both publicly and privately in communication with the board. After a unanimous vote concluded that this text would remain on library shelves, we are now being called to attend an appeal meeting to answer questions. I have a hard time imagining what questions might be asked about the process that have not already been answered by Ms. Taylor and our notes that were emailed to the members of the board following the conclusion of the review. All committee members volunteered ample time in the spring, and inviting us to offer up more time and forego confidentiality seems imprudent. I acknowledge that some books are not for all students, and what is deemed appropriate for some parents and guardians may not translate for all. However, the legal guidance was explicit. Banning books is a slippery slope. Half of a Yellow Sun, Kachimamanda Ngozi Adichie, opened my eyes to the events of the Biafran Civil War, an event that is not the subject of discussion in English or history class. Books are meant to serve as windows and mirrors. As an educator, I support books that function as mirrors for students to see their experiences reflected in literature. As an educator, I champion for books that act as windows into other cultures and experiences. As an educator, I invite students to build empathy. Adichie's brilliant storytelling challenged my thinking and opened my eyes to important conversations about race, ethnicity, class, gender, education, and moral obligation. My involvement in the rigorous review process has been depleted. This appeal meeting with community members and media presence reads more like a trial than a productive discussion. All committee volunteers agreed to read the text as a whole, while members of the board and the community have lifted excerpts from the text and presented them without context. I feel as though the important work of the committee has been disregarded. And finally, a much shorter response from a parent who also is not here this evening, who was also on the committee. Although I do not have time to dedicate to the committee for the appeal, I still feel the same way I did at the initial meetings last spring. I prefer not to be at the center of the controversy. I think you are doing fantastic work, and I applaud your ongoing efforts. I will continue to support the process behind the scenes, using my vote and voice in ways that I can. Do any of you wish to share any additional comments?
I have a couple of thoughts. Yes? No? Okay, good. So I have a couple thoughts. I was going to explain the process, but I think Amy did a really nice job covering it, and I don't have much to add to that, so thank you. I respect and uphold any parent right to refuse a book to their child or young adult. I think there are excerpts from many books that can be pulled, but it removes the true meaning of the whole text when you read it in its entirety. Students often select independent reading books that are to their interest. My senior, for example, loves reading presidential biographies and the Federalist Papers for fun. To each their own, right? But I believe access to books that are of interest are important for growth and building perspective and empathy. I've been reminded through the process that my role as a parent is to ask questions and support my kids in their learning and day-to-day interactions. Not just regarding the books they're reading, but the things they see on social media, the internet, and hear about at school. Finally, I trust the leaders and teachers of Hudsonville. Although this process of this book review has not gone as expected, I hope this extra step we've taken together tonight can build confidence that we as a committee did not take this decision lightly. We used our heads and our hearts. When I was contacted about joining the committee, I decided I would take up the challenge. I enjoy pleasure reading and I like to be involved with what my children are learning. I often would read the same books my children did just to be exposed to something new and understand what they were learning about. I was chosen randomly, as Ms. Taylor mentioned before. I do not pretend to be a literary expert, nor one who would tell any parent what their child should read. I just wanted to help answer the question at hand about whether this particular book should remain on the shelf. Not only did I read the book in its entirety, including on the beach during spring break, but I also reviewed online commentary and summaries to understand the topics and the thoughts. I also reviewed about the Biafran War afterwards to understand whether or not the book was historically correct or directionally correct, because it was nothing I knew about. So I wanted to make sure that it was representative of what the story was trying to tell. Then we obviously voted, and the vote that I took was to understand whether or not the book should remain on the shelf, not that anybody should touch the book. Anyways, that the book should be be on the shelf so that it can be chosen by a high school student at their discretion. It is each student's and parent's right to select an appropriate book for them. Also, the legal precedents that we reviewed seemed to indicate that there was not a basis to remove the book from the shelf. The process was well developed and thorough. It challenged all the committee members to seriously evaluate the book, collecting all of our notes we were required to take to document that we went through it seriously. A lot of hours were dedicated to the process. I even revealed myself back in May to the board and to the public as a member of the committee, so that I could answer questions about the process before it reached this level, and yet no one, not one person, reached out to better understand the process or understand what I was thinking as that member. I'm open to any questions you have to validate my process to review this book.
I would just affirm everything that the other committee members have said tonight, but as a staff member, I just want to say that it's not been my experience that teachers ever push books. We work very hard to work with parents as a partnership to find books that are a good fit for those students. And in my experience, whether it's a book club or a choice book, we actually teach students that anytime that you are uncomfortable with a book, or that it's one that you feel like you maybe don't want to read, we also teach students how to abandon books. So I just want to emphasize that we take our role seriously and are more than happy to accommodate parents and their own family beliefs.
All set, Ms. Taylor?
Yes.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you for walking through that, and committee members for your comments. We'll now turn it over to Ms. Rucci.
I have been a member of this community all of my life. My husband and I, as well as both of our parents, are HBS graduates. 2 of our sons are HBS graduates, and 2 of them are still here attending Hudsonville High School. My family and I care about our school and our community as a whole. I want to clarify that in no way is this an attack on the teachers. All of our children have been blessed by wonderful teachers. I value them as they've come alongside my boys in incredible ways. I do believe that they're good people who pour their heart and soul into their classrooms every day. It needs to be said that I'm not in the business of banning books, rather evaluating the appropriateness of the book entitled Half of a Yellow Sun. The purpose of my request for an appeal to the book committee's decision to allow this book to remain on classroom shelves and in the library is to provide our school board with the ability to have the final say in this decision. My request was submitted with sincerity and complete respect, and my hope was for board members to hold a vote on whether or not to allow their decision to stand. I truly didn't see myself sitting before you tonight, yet here I am. Under Michigan law, the Board of Education has the ultimate responsibility for the school district operations. The primary function of the board is to oversee the education of people in the community. Among other things, the revised school code gives each Board of Education general powers to provide for the safety and welfare of students. Student welfare encompasses the mental, physical, and emotional well-being of students. I do recognize that this book has won many awards and received high reviews. In 2007, it won the Women's Prize for Fiction, the Ainsfield Wolf Book Award for Fiction, and the Penn Open Book Award, and in 2020 it was voted Women's Winner of Winners for a 25-year period. I'm not disagreeing with this being an award-winning book. The question is whether it is appropriate for high school students. Most of them are minors with ages ranging 14 to 18 years old. I would assume all those ages visit our libraries. In our public libraries, Half of a Yellow Sun is not found in the junior section of the library, but rather the adult section. Random House did publish the book as an adult book. Locally, the book can be found in Hudsonville, Gary Viker, in Jenison at Georgetown, in Holland at Herrick, in Byron Township, Kentwood in Wyoming, Kent District Libraries. If this book is available at a public library, that's one thing, but when our school puts it in the hands of minors in our school library and on the classroom shelves, that's an entirely different issue that I feel the board needs to address. It is worth noting that the movie released in 2014 was rated R for sexual content and some violence. I too have read the book in its entirety, and I find it to be pervasively vulgar with sexually explicit content throughout its entirety. It seems the only way that this can be communicated is by reading the content directly with you. Page 9. Ever since they started to push out those pointy breasts, he had wondered if they would feel mushy soft or hard like the unripe fruit from the oak tree. He often wished that Annalika wasn't so flat-chested. He wondered what was taking her so long anyway, since she and Nesanichi were about the same age, so that he could feel her breasts. Annalika would slap his hand away, of course, and perhaps even slap his face as well, but he would do it quickly, squeeze and run, and that way he would at least have an idea and know what to expect when he finally touched Nesanichi's. But he worried he might never get to touch them. Page 10. They, her breasts, were images saved for last on many nights when he touched himself, slowly at first and then vigorously until a muffled moan escaped him. Finally, he let her breasts form. Sometimes they felt hard, tempting him to bite into them, and other times they were so soft he was afraid his imaginary squeezing caused her pain. Page 30. He touched himself at night. Page 31. She was moaning loudly, sounds that seemed so unlike her, so uncontrolled and stirring and throaty. He stood there for a long time until the moan stopped, and then he went back to his room. Page 32. His tongue was in her mouth, and she felt a new warmth between her legs. Page 36. His desire at that moment was so intense that his groin ached. Page 36. She did not know that a man's thrust could suspend memory, that it was possible to be poised in a place where she could not think or remember but only feel. Page 41. He pulled her to him, and for a while Olana did nothing, her body limp against his. She was used to this, being grabbed by men who walked around in a cloud of cologne-drenched entitlement. Page 42. Olana wanted to ask if they had promised him an affair with her. Page 43. So you will be spreading your legs for that elephant in exchange for Daddy's contract. Page 44. The benefit of being the ugly daughter is that nobody uses you as sex bait. Page 53. Seeing their parents through the curtain, hearing the sounds that might suggest an eerie pain to a child as their father's hips moved and their mother's arms clutched him. She had never heard her own parents make love. never even seeing any indication that they did. Page 60, he pulled her forcefully, kissed her, pressed her to him. You should eat first, she said. I know what I want to eat. Page 61, his hands were not gentle. They were unbuttoning her blouse, freeing her breast from a bra cup. She was not sure how much time had passed, but she was tangled in bed with Odenipo, warm and naked. Page 62, Olana watched Odenipo raise his glass to his lips, and all she could think of was how those lips had fastened around her nipple only minutes ago. She moved so that her inner arm brushed against her breast and closed her eyes at the needles of delicious pain. Sometimes Odenipo bit too hard. Page 63, Olana wondered if he remembered how loud they had been and how afterward he had said laughing. If we go on like this at night, we'll probably wake Agu up. Page 73. You are supposed to grow up and feel and then decide what you want. My sister and I are meat. Page 78. It aroused him, that brief glimpse of pink tongue. Page 79. Perhaps it was why an erection eluded him, the gelding mix of surprise and desire. They undressed quickly. His naked body was pressed to hers, and yet he was limp. He explored the angles of her collarbones and her hips, all the time willing his body and his mind to work better together, willing his desire to bypass his anxiety. But he did not become hard. He could feel the flaccid weight between his legs. He pulled on his trousers that might just as well have stayed on, and she hooked her bra. Page 80. When he began to pull her dress up above her thighs, she pushed him away calmly, as if she knew his frenzy was simply armor for his fear. She hung her dress over the chair. He was so terrified of failing her again that seeing himself direct made him deliriously grateful. So grateful that he was only just inside her before he felt that involuntary tremble that he could not stop. They lay there, he on top of her, for a while, and then he rolled off. He wanted to tell her that this had never happened to him before. His sex life with Susan was satisfactory. Page 82. He would dream about being inside her, thrusting as deep as he could. Page 85. Richard sat up in bed, naked, looking down at Kanine. He had just failed her again. I'm sorry, I think I get overexcited. Page 86. She would find herself a man capable of performing. Page 86. She got up and he wanted to pull her back, but he didn't. He could not trust his body and could not bear to disappoint her yet again. Page 95. He felt an unpleasant emotion, though, seeing Odenipo's hand placed on her shoulder and later imagining them together in bed. Page 98. Often he would try to keep his mind from worrying about failing Kanine at night. His body was still so unreliable. And he had discovered that thinking about failure made it more likely to happen. Page 107. He had sucked all the bones and he imagined that the taste of Olana's mouth was in his as he started to wash the dishes. The first time he sucked her bones weeks ago, it was after he saw her and Master kissing in the living room on a Saturday morning. Their open mouths pressed together. The thought of her saliva in Master's mouth had both repelled and excited him. It still did. It was the same way he felt about her, moaning at night. He did not like to hear her, and yet he often went to their door to press his ear against the cold wood and listen, just as he examined the underwear she hung in the bathroom. Black slips, slippery bras, white pants. Page 136. She closed her eyes because he was straddling her now, and as he moved languorously at first and then forcefully, he whispered, "We will have a brilliant child." Afterwards, she felt happy knowing that some of the sweat on her body was his and some of the sweat on his body was hers. Each time after he slipped out of her, she pressed her legs together, crossed them at her ankles, and took deep breaths. Page 146. He was aroused by her silky skin rubbing against his. Page 151. Agu noticed, again, the new, suspicious roundness to her body, the breasts that filled her blouse, the buttocks that rolled with each step. Onyeka must have touched her. Agu could not bear to think of the man's ugly body thrusting into his sister's. Page 153. Has Onyeka touched you? Of course Onyeka has touched me. Agu slowed his pace. He knew she must have slept with Onyeka, and yet he did not like her confirming it. When Chinyere first started to sneak across the hedge to his boys' quarters for hasty thrusts in the dark, he had told Onyeka about it during a visit home, and they had discussed it. So at this point, we're partway through chapter 7. Two of the main characters, Olana and Odenipo, they learned through the radio of the first coup, which is the start of the Nigerian War. So 153 pages in, all that sexual content, and the war wasn't even going on yet. I'd like to point out that our Assistant Superintendent of Curriculum Instruction has stated that the teachers would not have selected the work to be part of their classroom instruction or classroom library if the work was devoid of serious educational value, in a parent letter dated August 24th. The sexual content far outweighs the supposed educational value here. I'll continue reading. Page 161. He hoped Junior would slip under the hedge and come over. They never planned it. She just appeared on some days and didn't on others. She smelled of stale onions. The light was off, and the thin stream that came from the security bulb outside, he saw the cone-shaped rise of her breasts, and she pulled her blouse off, untied the wrap around her waist, and lay on her back. There was something moist about the darkness, about their bodies close together, and he imagined that she was Nasanichi and that the taut legs encircling him were Nasanichi's. She was silent at first, and then hips thrashing, her hands tight around his back, she called out the same thing she said every time. It sounded like a name, Aboni, but he wasn't sure. Perhaps she imagined that he was someone else too, someone back in her village. Page 201. She took his hand and touched it to her face, pressed it against her breast. Touch me. I'm going to tell Patel. I want him to come in and take a look at you. Touch me. She knew he didn't want to, that he touched her breast because he would do whatever she wanted, whatever would make her better. She caressed his neck, buried her fingers in his dense hair, and when he slid into her, she thought about Ariza's pregnant belly. Page 216. A well-dressed young woman had come up to Richard at the train station and taken his hand. Come to my flat. I never do it with Onyenbowen before, but I want to try everything now. Page 222. Ugo was already imagining his arrival for the ceremony. This time he would finally hold Nasanichi, naked and pliant, in his arms. His Uncle Ezzy's hut was a good place to take her, or perhaps even the quiet grove by the stream, as long as the little children did not bother them. He hoped she would not be silent like Chinir. He hoped she would make the same sounds he heard from Olana when he pressed his ear to the bedroom door. Page 240. Mama Dozy, it was said, had threatened to cut off Papa Dozy's penis at first. Her penis first, before strangling him. Page 250. Ugu knew the young woman. He had noticed her because of how perfectly rounded her buttocks were, how they rolled rhythmically from side to side as she walked. Her name was Avarici. The story was that her parents had given her to a visiting army officer as one would give a kola nut to a guest. They had knocked on his door at night, opened it, and gently pushed her in. Page 252. At first his bride was Olana, and then transformed into Nasanichi, and then Avarici with a perfectly rounded buttocks. Page 281. Amala had forced herself on him, that it had been a brief, rash lust. Afterward she told him to get out. Page 281. His rotten penis will fall off soon. Odenigbo has done what all men do and has inserted his penis in the first hole he could find when we were away. Page 293. She kissed his lips. He pulled her forcefully close, and then just as quickly he let go and moved his face away. She could hear his rapid breathing. She unbuckled his trousers and moved back to pull them down and laughed because they got stuck in his shoes. She took her dress off. He was on top of her, and the carpet pricked her naked back, and she felt his mouth limply enclose her nipple. It was nothing like Odenigbo's bites and sucks. Nothing like those shocks of pleasure. Richard did not run his tongue over her in that flicking way that made her forget everything. Rather, when he kissed her belly, she was aware that he was kissing her belly. Everything changed when he was inside her. She raised her hips, moving with him, matching his thrust, and it was as if she was throwing shackles off her wrists, extracting pins from her skin, freeing herself with the loud cries that burst out of her mouth. Afterward, she felt filled with a sense of well-being. Page 294. He had sensed this even while holding her naked, but it had not marred the pleasure he found in her curvy body, her moving with him, her taking as much as she gave. He had never been so firm, never lasted so long as he had with her. Page 296. All they did, as far as he was concerned, was have sex with one another's wives and husbands. Page 301. Did your mother pull out your penis and insert it into Amala as well? Page 303. He was used to her throaty moans, but what he heard now was an outward gasping, as if she was gearing up to erupt, as if Master was pleasing and angering her at the same time, and she was waiting to see how much pleasure she could take before she let out the rage. Page 308. Odenigbo placed his hands on her thigh. His defenselessness moved her. She knelt down before him and unbuttoned his shirt to tuck the soft, firm flesh of his belly. To suck the soft, firm flesh of his belly. She felt his intake of breath when she touched his trouser zipper. In her mouth, he was swollen stiff. The faint ache in her lower jaw, the pressure of widespread hands on her head excited her, and afterward she said, "Goodness, Ugwu must have seen us." He led her to the bedroom. They undressed silently and showered together, pressing against each other in the narrow bathroom and then clinging together in bed. Their bodies still wet and their movements slow. She marveled at the comforting compactness of his weight on top of her. Page 318. And I struggle with this one because I'm not going to say the F word. So you effed Richard. The conversation goes on. The good one should not F her sister's lover, and continues with, "It was just effing my lover after all." Page 328. That night she was silent as his thrust became faster. Page 354. Her lips were still against his, and her words suddenly took on a different meaning, and she moved back and pulled her dress over her head in one fluid gesture. She unbuckled his trousers. She did not let him take them off. She turned her back and leaned on the wall and guided him into her, excited by his surprise, by his firm hands on her hips. She knew she should lower her voice because of Ugwu and baby in the next room, and yet she had no control over her own moans, over the raw, primal pleasure she felt in wave after wave that ended with both of them leaning against the wall. Page 356. He would wave back a hello and imagine himself grasping those buttocks. Page 358, they chose the best houses and forced people's wives and daughters to spread their legs and cook for them. Page 360, she was wearing that tight skirt that molded her buttocks to a perfect roundness. It was difficult to keep his eyes from moving down to that magnificent set of buttocks. Ugwu waited for her to turn so that he could stare at her retreating backside. Page 369, she told him about her parents pushing her into the army officer's room, and he listened as if he had not heard it before. He had a big belly, he did it quickly, and then told me to lie on top of him. He fell asleep, and I wanted to move away, and he woke up and told me to stay there. Ugwu looked away. He felt angry that she had gone through what she had, and he felt angry with himself because the story had involved imagining her naked and had aroused him. He thought in the following days about him and ever reaching in bed, how different it would be from her experience with the colonel. He would treat her with respect that she deserved and do only what she liked. Only what she wanted him to do. He would show her the positions he had seen in Master's concise couple's handbook. He had thought about trying some of the positions with Chinier, but never did. He wanted to remember some finer details, what the woman had done with her hands in the sideways from behind position, for example. Page 371. He not only wanted to squeeze her naked buttocks, he also wanted to wake up next to her. Page 386. Desire reeled inside him, but he would wait for evening, after dinner, after they had entertained any guests. They would go up to the veranda, and he would push the table aside and spread out the soft rug and lie on his naked back. When she climbed astride, he would hold her hips and stare up at the night sky. Page 421. He would jump on top of me, moan like a goat, and that was it. She raised her finger with something this small, and afterward he would smile happily without ever wondering if I had known when he started and stopped. Men. Page 434. Kaduna says every Igbo woman deserves to be raped. Page 446. He leaned closer and tasted the tart dirt behind her ear. Then he kissed her neck, her jaw, her lips. Under the pressure of his tongue, she opened her mouth, and the gushing warmth of it overwhelmed him. His hand moved to her chest and enclosed her small breast. She pushed it away. He lowered it to her belly and kissed her mouth again before quickly slipping his hand under her skirt. "Just let me see," he said before she could stop him. "Just see." She stood up. She did not pull him back as he raised her skirt and pulled down the cotton underwear with a small tear at the waistband and looked at the large rounded lobes of her buttocks. He pulled the underwear back up and let go of her skirt. Page 457. The bar girl was lying on her back on the floor, her wrapper bunched up at her waist, her shoulders held down by a soldier, her legs wide ajar. She was sobbing, "Please, please let go." Her blouse was still on. Between her legs, High-Tech was moving. His thrusts were jerky, his small buttocks darker colored than his legs. The soldiers were cheering. High-Tech, enough. Discharge and retire. High-Tech groaned before he collapsed on top of her. The soldier pulled him off and was fumbling at his own trousers when somebody said, "No, target destroyer is next." Ugwu backed away from the door. Target destroyer is afraid. Ugwu shrugged and moved forward. "Who is afraid?" he said disdainfully. "I just like to eat before others, that is all. The food is still fresh." "Target destroyer, aren't you a man?" On the floor, the girl was still. Uncle pulled his trousers down, surprised at the swiftness of his erection. She was dry and tense when he entered her. He did not look at her face, or the man pinning her down, or anything at all as he moved quickly and felt his own climax, the rush of fluids to the tips of himself, a self-loathing release. He zipped up his trousers while some soldiers clapped. Finally, he looked at the girl. She stared back with calm hate. Page 463. I hear there's a lot of free sex here, but the girls have some kind of sexually transmitted disease? The Bonnie disease? You guys have to be careful so you don't take anything back home. Page 491. They climbed silently onto their mattress on the floor. When he slid into her, she thought about how different he felt, lighter and narrower on top of her. He was still, so still she thrashed around and pulled at his hips, but he did not move. Then he began to thrust, and her pleasure multiplied, sharpened on stone so that each tiny spark became a pleasure all its own. Page 497. He could not remember her features, but the look in her eyes stayed with him, as did the tense dryness between her legs. The way he had done what he had not wanted to do, in that gray space between dreaming and daydreaming, where he was controlled most of what he imagined. He saw the bar, smelled the alcohol, and heard the soldiers saying, "Target destroyer," but it was not the bar girl that lay on her back on the floor. It was a Barici. Page 498. Can you believe who was responsible for that small girl your room was pregnancy? Kenny asked. And Abu almost did not recognize her. His eyes bulged out of her angular face, filled with rage and tears. Can you believe it is Father Marcel? He effed most of them before he gives them the crayfish that I slaved to get here. How could you stay here and let him spread the legs of starving girls? Page 526. What happened to Annalika? You didn't know? What? They forced themselves on her. 5 of them. So one thing that I failed to mention here is before we even reached the point of the start of the war, the author here covered masturbation, sex, oral sex, and the inability to get an erection. And that continued through the rest of the book. But all those topics were covered before any history was even mentioned. Now that you've heard the contents of this book, please ask yourself if this is a book that you would select for your son, your daughter, grandson, your granddaughter, or a child of one of your friends. If it's not, why keep it on your classroom shelves, or even the main library shelves as leisure reading? It is available at local public libraries. There are 64 sexual encounter descriptions in this book, of which sex occurs numerous times. Additionally, there's a graphic gang rape scene. Half of the Yellow Sun is a historical fiction. If our goal is to show students the harsh reality of war, there are likely better selections than one that is pervasively vulgar. The sexual content outweighs any literary merit argument. Nigeria is the setting, the Civil War is the conflict, but one could argue that the main theme of the book here is the sex lives of 2 sisters and a perverse houseboy named Abu. Part of the problem here is the lack of a universal rating system for books. Movies have ratings, video games have ratings, comic books have ratings, TV has ratings, and music has ratings. As a parent, up to this point, we have been trusting HPS to provide appropriate reading material for our students. Books seem to get a free pass. We are seeing a cultural shift in book content, and it's become a state and national issue. This issue is not going away. Books appear to be a loophole within the school system for supplying sexual content to minors. It's up to our school board to tighten this loophole. A few sources that we turn to for guidance as parents. Compass is a website, though they have nothing listed on half of the Yellow Sun. Common Sense Media, same thing, but they have nothing listed there either. Goodreads gave it a 4.3 out of 5. Over 137,000 ratings. Said lots of people like this book. It received awards, but that site does not tell me if it has any content that's not suitable for minors. BookLooks is a newer book rating site, and this site finally gives an actual content-based rating, or based review with a rating. BookLooks gave half of Yellow Sun a rating of 4 out of 5. On their scale of 4 means that it is not appropriate for minors. It says it's adult content, no child under 18, it contains explicit sexual nudity, depictions of sexual organs in the state of arousal, obscene references to sexual activities. In their summary of concerns, it says this book contains sexual activities including sexual assault and sexual nudity. Then in your packet, I included their rating system just so that you can see for yourself what the 0 through 5 stand for. There are numerous sources out there linking the dangers to premature exposure to sexually explicit media. It was hard to keep it to a page. I've listed 5. 1, many studies indicate the use of graphic material by students indicate negative psychological effects, including more casual sex partners and sex at young ages. 2, the content of the literature that they are exposed to when they are young will shape the way they interact with the world for years to come. 3, research has shown that the content of sexually explicit material overly depicts gratification of sexual behaviors and pays little or no attention to negative consequences, degrades women and skews away from intimacy and tenderness, and delivers an overly permissive sexual script. 4, media erotic fantasies become deeply embedded, commonly coercing, confusing, motivating, and addicting many of those exposed. Neurochemical imprinting affects children and teens especially deeply. They're still developing brains, process emotions differently with significantly less rationality and cognition than the adult brain. And the last one I listed, exposure to even nonviolent sexual content increases what has been called sexual callousness. Our Assistant Superintendent of Curriculum Instruction oversaw the book committee, which consisted of 7 people, like she just went over. It should be noted that some of those selected for the book committee had previously voiced their support of the book before the committee had been formed. Therefore, I do think it makes it a little difficult to have a non-biased review of the book. A few things from their report that I found interesting. 6 of the members selected that some content could possibly create some controversy on a moral or ethical grounds, but only from those who hold views not commonly held by members of this community. Let that resonate for a minute. Is it possible that some of those chosen for this committee are out of touch with our community? It should be mentioned that it was only a couple short months after the committee completed their report when the south end of town overwhelmingly voted to non-renew a millage, knowing it may close library doors because of their belief that the library was promoting books with sexually explicit content. I bring that up because these are HPS families who do find this content very disturbing. The second thing to note, not one person on the committee selected content in the book is designed specifically for students at this age level and should be readily comprehended by most, if not all of the students. Not one person selected that. This should be alarming. Shouldn't the goal be for students to comprehend any reading material that they're given? And then lastly, the report specifically lists 2 pages of merits and or positives from the book and 1 page of challenges and or concerns. I find this to be an unbelievable ratio, and that 1/3 of what the book committee mentions are challenges and or concerns. HPS requires any student to download a web filter onto any device that will be connected to the school internet network. Why does HPS do this? Likely the main reason is to filter searches that would result in sexual content. In addition to this, HPS requires all students and parents to fill out a Student Education Technology Acceptable Use and Safety Agreement. Within this agreement, it states, the board has implemented technology protection measures which protect against internet access to visual displays, depictions, materials that are obscene, constitute child pornography, or are harmful to minors. The board also monitors online activity of students in an effort to restrict access to child pornography and other material that is obscene, objectionable, inappropriate, and or harmful to minors. HPS has worked to put these controls in place to keep the students from online search results containing sexual content. Why then is it okay to receive the content through the form of a book? If this book were in electronic form, wouldn't it be a violation of our very own internet policy? I'm not arguing that the Nigerian war itself was not full of violence, and knowing that it exists is an important thing not to overlook. If we did, we would be Westerners just burying our heads in the safe place of the United States and ignoring worldwide issues. However, the sexually explicit content is not for teenagers to be exposed to at this point in their lives. They can be taught about the war and understand the atrocities that occurred, similar to Nazi concentration camps, but not with this level of detail into the rape and sexuality of the characters. Teenagers are not equipped to digest this level of sexually explicit text. So I ask you tonight, what is the standard of Hudsonville Public Schools? We are at a turning point in our district. HPS must implement a plan for improving the approval process for young adult literature, including the removal of any book that merits the definition of pervasively vulgar and sexually explicit. I encourage you to remove this book from classroom library shelves and hope that you're willing to take the necessary steps to remove it from library shelves as well. At the foundation of any relationship is trust. If a book like this has district approval, it leaves many to wonder what else is in the classroom. It is not the role of HPS to expose children to sexually explicit content. Rather, HPS should protect them from it. Clearly, the district agrees on this because we have internet filters for this very reason. The revised school code gives the board general powers to provide for the safety and welfare of students. This includes protecting their minds as words create pictures. This is not about sheltering our children. Rather, it's about guiding them to what is best. Our students deserve to be given a higher standard by their educators, and our community deserves better than this. Thank you for hearing my appeal tonight.
Thank you for your comments, Mr. Jenkins. Okay, at this point, we will open up to questions from the board for either of our panelists or, and then dialogue from the board as well. So if there's obviously any clarifying questions you'd like to ask, and then dialogue. So I'll open it up to the board. There were just kind of started off, Ms. Taylor, there were 7 voting members. Have I got that right?
Correct.
Okay, let me make sure I get that number right. Thank you.
Now, on that same question, Mrs. Rujek, are you saying, based on the slide presentation that was given to us in here, that you do not believe the process was followed?
Commenting on the process, I'm commenting on the content of the book. I find it hard to believe that anybody could come to the decision that they made in allowing it to remain on classroom shelves. I appealed because I think the board needs to have the final say.
I think it would be appropriate then for the 2 parents who are on the committee, because Mrs. Rujek, you specifically seem to insinuate that there was a bias on the committee and that they maybe don't hold the same views and they're out of touch with the community. I think it's only fair that they give an opportunity to respond to those comments.
I can go first. I guess I thought this was more about a process than about my personal connection to the community. I love this community. It's about access to the books and a parent saying yes or no. And for me, I have to be responsible enough to ask my kids what they're reading and trust that the teachers are looking at my child and saying, you're going to struggle with this text. I know you. I can't tell you how many times I've looked at my students' reading books and said, this is an awesome fit. And my youngest would say, Mrs. Estefan said this is a good fit book for me, Mom. And my students that are potentially able to read this book are 17 and 18 years old. So there's difficult concepts, but I'm here to process it with them and discuss it.
I'll comment and kind of echo a little bit of what Holly said, but when I read this book, and as I mentioned in my statement earlier, is when my children were reading books, a lot of times I would pick those up and read them alongside of them so I knew exactly what they were reading. We could have conversation about it, but I felt that was my role as a parent, to be able to make things available. So I decided, as I went through these thought processes, is there anything here that would say the entire population should not be exposed to this book? And I think as a parent, it's our responsibility, and that's what I felt was my responsibility to say, I decide whether or not my child should read this book, and I wouldn't have a problem reading it as long as I was walking alongside them and having that conversation with them. And I felt the complexity of this book was very difficult. This is not something that's going to be picked up by every child and exposed to every child, and therefore, from that standpoint, it's not going to be a topic of conversation throughout the halls of Hudsonville or on social media at all. But if it's right for a child to learn about what happens in the wars, and not just that there is a war, but it's brutal and it's violent and it's not appropriate. It's not what we all want to know. But that's where you have the conversations about the books, and you learn from those books. So that's where I chose what I wanted, made my recommendation was this should be out there and accessible to our families to choose whether it's right for them or not. Not for me to decide for that.
I first want to thank the book committee. You spent a lot of time on this, and I also want to thank Mrs. and I'm going to botch your last name. You've presented a very good appeal. To start, I just have a couple comments. There's been comments made about the First Amendment and legal issues. So back in December, the board was invited to a Title IX presentation. A couple of us attended, and at the end, there was conversation about the books and our new book guidelines. And the attorney at that time stated that we could not remove any books due to religious or political reasons. And I don't think that this book falls under that category. And please correct me if I'm wrong, Amy or Dr. Vanderjack, but I believe that's what the attorney said. We could not remove books due to religious or political reasons. So I'm not exactly sure what was shared with the committee, but that's what I learned at the Title IX presentation in December. The other thing that we've talked about a lot tonight is transparency. Parents want to know what their children are reading. That's transparency. I could select a choice book out of a classroom library and never bring that book home. I could read it during class when we have open time. The parent may never know what they're reading. They might ask, doesn't mean that the student has to tell them. And we've been asked that the teachers will come along and beside our student and family to help select books. I know they will. But right in our book guidelines, and I believe in a parent letter that went home to Allward Elementary students just this academic year, it said teachers might not know of all the content contained in their classroom libraries due to the sheer volume of books that we have. That's right in our book guidelines. So if a teacher is going to walk alongside the students and the families, but if they don't know the content of all the books in their libraries, how do I know that they can help my child select the best book? We're trusting them. But right in our guidelines, it says, due to the sheer volume, they may not know the content. So again, it comes back to transparency. At a recent board work session, there was a suggestion that was made about being able to scan books. But yet we have individuals that do not support scanning books. If we have a system in place where we can scan a book, mom and dad can see, or the guardian can see what they're reading. Now, yes, we would have to do some homework and go online. And yes, there are issues. We often refer to Common Sense Media, but after 3 reviews, I'm sorry, there's no more reviews. You can change your browser and you can get 3 more, but then you're done. There are many books that are not on Common Sense Media. It can be hard to find the content. And even when you do, you don't necessarily know the depth that's contained in the book. So why are we afraid
to get a scanning system for the library or for our classroom libraries? It seems like everyone could support that.
There are active plans, as we shared at the last work session. We're moving forward with that. There'll be an update. So that was from my perspective, part of what we discussed, is that there is a plan in place.
It was, but there were no decisions that were made. You know, because we had talked about the main library, because that can be done in a matter of weeks. Classroom libraries were more of an issue.
Not an issue, just a little bit more complex. So we've been exploring that. And again, that was very transparent at the work session, that we were moving forward with those plans.
Transparency, that would help with transparency.
Absolutely, and that is our goal, which we discussed. So we started with the transparency of the book guidelines last year, and moving forward with clarity of summaries going home about book clubs and so forth. And so this year, with the addition of the librarian, we're working on that increased transparency. And those were two things we brought to the work session to get your feedback and thinking, and we are moving forward with those.
Good. All right, thank you. I don't want to monopolize the conversation, but all kids matter. But parents are responsible for their kids, and parents have the approval of what their kids read or are exposed to. So thank you.
Other comments?
I too just
All right, that one's a little better, thank you. I too want to express appreciation both to Mrs. Rujan for a very thoughtful presentation and appeal tonight, as well as to all of the parents and staff and teachers who put investment into time into the book process and spending all that energy in reviewing it. Mrs. Armstrong, maybe just a question of a couple things I didn't hear in the presentation as I'm sort of processing all this information. As we established in the book guidelines and went through this process, how many times has this process been used for other books? Is this the first time, or?
This was the first time, and it was used additionally just a few days later for use in another book.
Okay, and so if this was the first time the book went through the process, and this is the first time the process has been appealed, we're really in uncharted waters in many ways in what we're doing. So trying to be very thoughtful in how we consider all the information and proceed, and just appreciate all the thought that has gone into the process overall. This book in particular, do we know how long it's been in the district?
Yes, it came into the district in 2017.
2017. And do we know how long it was on the choice? I'm sorry, not the choice. The book club list.
It was, I know, there's a lot. It was first offered as a book club choice in 2018-19 school year. Not chosen by a group every year, however. Usually about 3 to 6 students each year starting in 2020. So even though it was offered in those early years, it was not chosen by students.
Thank you. And then early, when you laid out the original timeline of the presentation, when the book, when the decision was made to remove it from that choice list, or the book club list, but to leave it as a choice book in the classroom, could you maybe speak a little more to that process of how the decision is made for books to either go on a book club list or come off a book club list, and why this book was pulled off that list?
Yeah, so that book was pulled off the list based on the committee reviewing and I guess current status at that time of people having objection to the book. Again, knowing that a couple parents did say they wanted their child to continue reading it, it just seemed as if from an age-appropriate standpoint, so that is one of the reasons that we can remove a book or move it from one library to another is based on age appropriateness. This was offered as a book club list, or a book club selection in 21st Century Lit, which is 11th and 12th grade students. I'm not sure if I answered your question entirely. Oh, part of the conversation that the review committee had when we were processing where it would go, at the bottom of the rubric, you'll notice the two choices for the committee where the book should be removed for this level, class, or intended purpose, and knowing that the book was in the library at that time, or the book should be retained in its current location for its current purpose. We did have conversation as a committee about classroom library versus school library, and if there was a difference. And the committee really landed in a place of having some thinking about there's actually more oversight of the book if it's in a classroom library versus the school library, because teachers often know who's checking out which books from their library shelves, and it may provide that opportunity. So we did have that conversation, but that was where that decision landed. From a kind of annual process, there's certainly books published all the time, and as teachers continue to prepare for their school years, oftentimes they're making decisions about what's going to be on my book club list for this year, and they make those decisions as departments. And then there is the formal process now where those books are required to go through my office and be fully vetted by the teachers, and the summary pages included, and that was part of that increased transparency that we worked on last year.
Thank you. So I'm trying to understand, in terms of future book club lists, and how those books get on there is now, as you're describing, there's a little more rigor than there was previously in how books would be added. And so the committee's decision on this book was really related to, do we leave it in the classroom libraries, but there's no decision per se on could it ever get back on a book club list or not?
No, I mean, I suppose from a documentation standpoint, part of our guidelines are also that I report to the board of any reconsideration of texts, and in the curriculum office we have all of the documentation and communication. So my thinking would be that this process and the board building decision would stay intact.
Thank you. And could you give, in terms of the legal guidance that was reviewed at the committee, could you give a little more insight into that guidance itself and any criteria that was shared with the committee about how legal guidance would inform their decisions?
Sure. So it is a 9-page document. It's in your packet. It's pages 21 through, looks like 29. And so there are many pieces and parts to it. That was the activity that we did where we did the lift a line protocol so that everybody could highlight the particular areas. It contains information adapted from the American Library Association. It encompasses our core beliefs, which I spoke to. It encompasses professional resources that support kind of our model of instruction, which is our Reader's Workshop model of instruction. It encompasses state standards of guidance and what the robust reading that we need our students to do. It covers the standards, and then it gets into legal guidance about First Amendment, access to library resources and services for minors. Again, taking information from official American Library Association policy statements. Really a lot of the guidance under the American Library Association policy speaks specifically to the idea that parents have a right to choose what their own child reads, but not necessarily what other children read. And so those are some of the big pieces under the American Library Association. And then it does get into various case law and court cases related to intellectual freedom, going over the Miller test, which is determining whether it's obscene. And there's 3 criteria for that. Does the average person applying contemporary community standards? This is found on the top of page 7. Again, the Miller test. Does the average person applying contemporary community standards find the work taken as a whole appeals to the prurient interest of students? And does the text depict or describe in a patently offensive way sexual conduct specifically defined by the applicable state law? And does the text, taken as a whole, lack serious literary, artistic, political, or scientific value? It then goes into censorship versus selection. And then finally, legal definitions that are from True Law regarding obscenity, U.S. Supreme Court Again, establishing a 3-part test for juries in obscenity cases. Also noting that obscenity remains one of the most controversial and confounding areas of the First Amendment law, but then also goes on to define prurient interest as well as pornography. So there's a lot there, but that gives a general summary of what is included.
Thank you, Mrs. Taylor. I'm so grateful for the answers to the question. I'll stop monopolizing the time. Let others ask questions while I think of more.
Okay.
And in speaking just a little bit further to the legal part of it, I've read significant sections of the Island Trees case. And I think one of the things we need to continue to remind ourselves as well as the community that the law looks differently at items that are considered to be part of the curriculum, the board-approved curriculum, versus something a student is not required to read. And I think what gets lost in this is that distinction that our highest court has made, that as a board, we can implement curriculum that we feel meets the community values and meets what we need to from the state level. But when it comes to what's considered our libraries and those things that students can choose to read, there is a very, very high threshold legally as to what we as the board can do. And I know that's not always pleasant to hear. I know that's when I have to remind myself I took an oath to uphold state and federal law. And to me, that was helpful in reading part of that case that talked about the distinction between required curriculum and books that can be chosen from a library. And I think the only other comment I want to make is let's remember teachers, most teachers are parents too. They're not looking at these books in a vacuum. They not only have students, but they have children. And I have faith that they take their job very seriously.
Other questions or comments?
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay, I've written my comments so I wouldn't misstate myself. I did read the book, pretty much occupied my weekend. And this is the book that has brought us here for a rather lengthy meeting. It's been a long journey, but I would hope that it will take us to a better place. I want all students to grow in knowledge. And if there's anything we should learn from our first parents in Eden, it is that not all knowledge is good knowledge. Good knowledge builds and grows and flourishes in the minds of the readers, making them larger and better and fuller. Bad knowledge shrinks and demeans and deforms the minds of the readers. The idea that there is objectivity or neutrality in literature is both naive and dangerous. Every writer is trying to do something with your mind. Those who read this book will come away with different perspectives. Some will be struck with its great literary value, such as the one reviewer in the front of the book who compared this writer with Tolstoy. That reviewer and I have different valuations because I didn't see the shadow of Tolstoy's brilliance in this work. That doesn't make it bad. It only makes it, in my mind, less than extraordinary in its literary value. But I'm not an expert in literature. And not every book in our schools has to reach the rarefied heights of Tolstoy or Dostoevsky or C.S. Lewis or J.R.R. Tolkien. Some who read this work will be impressed with the historical information regarding West Africa and Nigeria in particular. Now, I'm not a historian, and much less regarding the history of Nigeria. But the historical content should neither condemn or commend the book because it presents itself as historical fiction. Not in the stature of James Michener, however. In this case, the historical accuracy was the servant of the author's storyline. What makes this work inappropriate for Hudsonville schools is its sexual content. And please don't think that I'm either uninformed or prudish about human sexuality. I am neither. However, the sexual knowledge in this book is not good knowledge because it shows no comprehension of the joy and beauty of sexual relations between a man and a woman in a committed relationship for a lifetime. That is the epitome. That is the grand objective of human sexuality. But this writer is selling our children short by portraying human sexual relations as divorced from personal trust and commitment. The sexual encounters described in this book are incidental and recreational. They are pedantic, transactional, and self-centered. Sadly, they are even impersonal. This is bad knowledge. It is a kind of knowledge that will leave our children with expectations of human sexuality that will never direct them to the joyful and fulfilling relationships we want them to experience as adults. It is bad knowledge. And it is bad because it does two dangerous things at the same time. First, it robs our children of their innocence by giving them descriptions they should not have to envision. And second, it indoctrinates them with a view of sex that will handicap them as they grow to maturity and search for a meaningful relationship in marriage. I know this pernicious knowledge is prolific all around us. I also know we can't protect our children from every danger out there. They can buy it in the bookstore, they can watch it on TV, they can hear it in music, they can order it from Amazon. But it doesn't belong in our schools as material endorsed by this board. It is not our place to contribute to these distortions. This book has brought us here, but the issue in Hudsonville is deeper and broader than this book, and we don't dare address this book and assume that all our problems are behind us, because they are not. This board needs to be about the business of informing and protecting our children, and we can do both at the same time. Any suggestion that we can't do both at once is a false dichotomy. Parents and educational institutions have done that for generations, and we can refresh those priorities here in Hudsonville. This will require two things. First, we must have a board that provides measurable guidelines on the inclusion of sexually explicit literature in our district. There are volumes of documents available to us that make clear the damage done to children by overtly sexual content. We can even invoke the wisdom and experience of our juvenile courts to hear their reports about the damage inflicted on children that come before them. Board members need to read this material and hear these case studies so they can come to an agreement on what books are the highest and best for our students. This is the business of this board, and at this juncture is of central importance. Number two, we must have an administration that will honor the guidelines of the Board of Education and lead their fellow administrators and teachers to respect and carry out our guidelines. This will not be a difficult task because we have a faculty and staff who are highly gifted and deeply committed to the growth and success of the students of Hudsonville. I look forward to partnering with this board as we move forward in our commitment to making this great district even better in the years ahead.
Larry?
I totally agree with Mark. If I haven't said it before, I only have 4 months left on the board, so, there's no political statement here, but when I think back to my days as a teenager and what Gretchen read from that book, I think that book would have flown off the shelves just because of the explicit sexual material. But then that was that atheistic school over there in West Ottawa, so, what can I say? But I do not believe that book belongs in any HPS library. I've got grandchildren coming through, and I would not want them to have the choice of checking something like that out, knowing they would need parental approval, but how easy is that to get around? And I will definitely be voting to take that book out of HBS.
Ms. Taylor and the committee was, Dr. Hooper spoke about the scanning process. That will take time and energy, and it's not something we turn on overnight. Was there any discussion or consideration about, with the book remaining on in classroom or media central libraries, the notion of a parent being informed that a student is checking the book out, somehow communicating that to the parents?
So that is part of the process of what we were moving forward with, in parents being able to request denying access to that, so that a pop-up, our librarian, Nicole Ball, shared that and that a pop-up would come up and say that the child doesn't have permission to check that out. But that would be part of a process that a parent would have to go in and select a specific title that they did not want their child to have access to. A lot of the legal guidance, I can find it potentially, but it says libraries and library governing bodies, this is on page 5, should not use rating systems to inhibit a minor's access to materials. They serve and have free, members of the communities they serve have free and equitable access to a diverse range of library resources. So I think that as a board, you could certainly make any decision you wanted in regard to how you would like us to proceed with that. However, the process that we followed was following the legal guidance that we consulted with our attorney around.
Sure.
There's another piece in here that comes under the Official American Library Association. And I'm not going to be able to probably find it at this exact minute. I can continue to look, but it does talk about, again, that connection to parents choosing what their child can read. And so I think the process we have moving forward would align with that legal guidance.
And just to clarify, that process, are you referring to the exploration of scanning that we're talking about, or, and my question is more along the lines of, so that, I know we talked about exploring that,
yeah,
and investigating that and getting the costs and so on and so forth, but in the near term, if we wanted to ask our librarian to say, look at putting something in place relative to this particular text in the classroom, in the media center, is there a way in the short term that's something, now imperfect, because kids will figure out how to get around things, but is there something that could be implemented in the short term?
The short answer is yes. I think the legal guidance in the process we followed was not steering us in a direction of being able to restrict even minors' access to materials, and that is encompassed here. So certainly, like I said, if that would be your prerogative as a board to require that is something that we would be able to do.
But we do, check me on this, but we do restrict, we send consents home now with students for parents to approve books, so aren't we already restricting that to a certain extent? Or
it's getting parent permission, which I guess would be different than a restriction of a book for all students.
Okay, I see what you're saying. I see the nuance.
And also, when the parents sign a permission slip, it's because it's for a book club, and they're going to be asked to, there's several books that are choices,
yep,
and so that's when, part of that class is, it's a unit, right? So the students are going to be asked to read that book,
yep,
whereas a choice book, there's never any obligation to read it.
yep.
Most of the legal guidance shows us that you can have a parent opt out of a book in a library. So what we've talked about, with the school library, a parent could say, say, this is a title I don't want my student to have access to, but what the legal guidance has, there's a Supreme Court case in which they ruled it wasn't legal for students to get a signature to read a book. It was like a Harry Potter book years ago where a school wanted the students to get a parent permission to read Harry Potter, and that was deemed by the Supreme Court as not legal. So it's more of an opt-out rather than an opt-in when it comes to like a parent signature for the book inside of a library.
It's interesting. I had sent members of the Board of Education a little bit of research that I had done on books. You know, it used to be just get kids to read. We want kids to read. Let them read anything. But in the last 10 to 20 years, there's been a significant number of research that is now looking at what are our kids reading and what's the effect of it. In particular, in regards to sexual content and violence content. I couldn't find anything in regards to language. But in my hunt, the American Library Association with the Bill of Rights, which Amy did mention, says that the mission of school and public libraries is to provide services and resources to meet the diverse interests and informational needs of the communities they serve. Article 5 states, a person's right to use a library should not be denied or abridged because of origin, age, background, or views. It goes on to state that the right to use a library includes free access to and unrestricted use of all services, materials, and facilities the library has to offer. Includes minors who do not have a parent or guardian available to sign a library card, application, or permission slip. Unaccompanied youth experiencing homelessness should be able to obtain a library card regardless of library policies related to chronological age. So the children, the students that are attending Hudsonville Public Schools, they have either a parent or a guardian, and they sign permission slips if they're going on a field trip. This would be no different if they had to sign a permission slip for certain books either, based on how I interpret this, and I could be wrong.
Exclusive to minors who do not have a parent who does. Okay.
But all the students here do.
Yeah.
You couldn't require.
So any, that may be something, I don't know, I'll ask for the initial reaction to that, Ms. Taylor, but there may be something you go, okay, I want to look at that and understand that more. What do you?
I would like to consult our attorney.
Yeah, okay.
Again, knowing that this was developed with the attorney.
Yeah, okay. Okay, other questions or comments, discussion from the board? Greg, you want to say something?
I'm just thinking out loud, which is probably very dangerous for me, but in terms of, I guess, questions, observations, you know, Mrs. Rujink, in one of your last statements, you said that we should implement a plan for approving the approval process for young adult literature, including the removal of any book that merits the definition of pervasively vulgar and sexually explicit. And Mark, in your comments, you said that the board should provide measurable guidelines of sexually explicit material. And we talked about common sense media, we talked about book looks, and I think that this is a real question that we have to wrestle with as a district and should wrestle with as a district of how do we develop appropriate guidelines and criteria around this, because I know there's a lot of conversation about this book, but this is so much larger than a book. I think it gets to guidance around where is that threshold in a book that it's too offensive to work its way into a building, and does this book meet that threshold or not? Obviously there's a range of emotions. I know we can all recognize that while a lot of folks, myself, the passages you read tonight were very uncomfortable, I'm sure for you to even read, and so I appreciate you taking the time to explain which passages stuck out to you. At the same time, I recognize that there's a lot more in a book of 500 pages than was read tonight, and to different readers are going to hear that book different ways. A lot of parents, myself included, would probably look at those passages and say, that's not a book that would be appropriate for either of my kids. Knowing how they are as readers, it's not a book I would, ever choose for them, nor frankly want for my kids to read that particular book. That said, this issue around, if we start to ban this book and other books, at what point do we reach that threshold of censorship where we've crossed a boundary? And that's what I'm struggling with in this overall discussion. I agree with wanting transparency about what are the books that are available to kids, what are the books that kids are reading, and how do we engage parents more in that dialogue. I think we need better tools and resources to help that. At the same time, I recognize we have as good or better transparency than we've ever had at any point in the history of this district into the books that are available and the processes that we're following. Our processes are stronger today than they've ever been at any point in our district, yet there's opportunity for them to be stronger, and I want to be a part of making them stronger. But that's what I think we're struggling with is it's going to be, as Mrs. Rugin, as you would say, the definition of pervasively vulgar and sexually explicit, like there's no commonly adopted definition that can be applied as a standard, and I think that that's something that to wrestle with. You're going to find a whole range of thresholds where for one family a single word is too much, and for other families, but getting to the point of do you quantify whether they saw the word 5 times or 10 times, or if it was graphic. I think the process of do we vet it, I like the notion of how we've approached it with a committee of folks to help us understand that threshold, and yet, based on the outcome, there's questions as to the authenticity of the process. And I'm not raising those questions myself, but I think an appropriate question is how do we get better at this process? So I'm just trying to ask a lot of thoughtful questions and really wrestle with this. So Mark, you obviously want to come up.
You want to speak first, Gretchen?
Well, I guess as far as the committee goes, since we are a very large district, I really struggle with the fact that it was a universal decision to keep a book with this sexually explicit content. It was unanimous to keep it there. And, had it been a 3-3, 3-4, something like that, that would have been interesting. The other thing that I noticed was Mrs. Taylor said that she started at the top of the alphabet when contacting parents, but yet she ended with a parent with a V. Was that your last name?
Yes, but I'm a curriculum office representative. I'm a parent, but I wasn't on the list of parents I'm a member of the curriculum office.
Okay.
So she filled the role of the curriculum office representative, which was one of the roles on the committee.
Yeah. And I understand that, but since we started with the letter A, I just think it's kind of interesting how many parents we went through before. You must have had a hard time finding volunteers.
I did.
Yeah. And there were 3 parents.
There were 3 parents, yes.
I don't know, I just thought it was very interesting that, one of the comments was the people that might have trouble with it was only from those who don't hold views commonly held by members of this community, but yet the south end of town, the south end of town clearly has problems with this content. So I just think it's very interesting that everybody on the committee is in agreement that the book is fine to stay. But again, I'm here to appeal to you guys as you have the final say in this.
Thanks, Gretchen, and just try to respond to what your comments were here, Chad. I see that we have two tasks before us as a board. One is that we need to make a decision on this book remaining or being removed from the district, or some other alternative about that. That decision needs to be made tonight and probably fairly soon before we all go to sleep here. The second issue is to develop guidelines. I know it's a formidable task, but I think we're up to that task, and I would like to see Hudsonville Public Schools be a leader in this task of developing measurable guidelines for books that come into our district. I think that has to happen, otherwise we're going to be back here forever and ever with book appeals. We need measurable guidelines for those that come into our district. And that is not an administrative job, that is a board job. And this board is capable of taking that on, and we saw it.
We certainly are. Now, Dr. Hooper and I were just talking on the side here that the book looks, I don't know if Ms. Taylor, you're familiar with that, but the book looks provides some, is rubric the right word? A rubric that I had not seen before, and so that's interesting. That's interesting back to the point about defining those guidelines. I mean, so there may be something there that, so thank you, Ms. Rugin, for bringing those in and maybe giving us a tool with which we can investigate and work with.
I would also add to the list that there in the PowerPoint presentation, there were several sites aside from Common Sense Media. I know that was one that fairly early on in our process last fall, we discovered there were some hiccups with that, but there is a list of Goodreads, Kirkus Reviews, American Library Association, Young Adult arm of the American Library Association, National Council of Teachers of English, Common Sense Media is listed there. However, we could come up with a laundry list, and probably now that we have a librarian, that list could be even longer of potential resources that might assist you.
Yeah. Again, just the way this one's laid out, the way it's very interesting.
I'm not familiar with that one.
Yeah, and so that's part of the reason we have a librarian now, is to help us help us guide through that. So I think there's something there that we can investigate. You know, I do want to share my own perspective. I've had 5 kids. My last one is a senior in the district this year. I have. My students are all over the map in terms of reading. Some of you have had some of my kids, and they're all over the map. And some of them are deep, deep readers and have read just anything and everything you throw at them. Others are, they're not readers at all, and which is regretful, but that is what it is. I do believe that if my students' AP Lit teacher were to come to me with certain of my children, not all of them, but with certain children, and say, I really think your child would benefit from reading this book because it's deep and it's thoughtful, and let's talk about some of the content that's in there, and then let's talk about whether your son or your daughter is ready to take on a book of this depth and complexity, and how that fits with your faith, which my family's faith is very deep, and how that fits, and what do we think about that? I have absolute trust, based on 3 decades of experience, that the teachers at this district would, because they have done exactly that. So that's my perspective. I'm not trying to sway anybody on the board. I'm just sharing my perspective from my 5 kids, senior this year, 30 years in the district, of those kids graduating in my last one this year. So I share that. Okay, unless there are other comments, we are at the point that we need to move forward, as Mr. Davis said. And I think if we back up a minute, before we take a motion on this particular outcome of the committee, I think the point about, again, determining those thresholds, doing some work around that. And again, that's why I'm excited is not the right word, but I think we have a tool here. Again, thank you, Mrs. Rucci, for bringing this. Something that we can work with as we wrestle with this notion of a threshold and work with the teaching staff. We do need to set that as a board, but we absolutely need input from the teachers who know our kids the best. That's my feeling. To do it as a board solely would miss all other stakeholders, or many other stakeholders that are dealing with our kids day in and day out. But I do believe we need to get there. So I think one action, and it doesn't, we don't have to take action on that, but I know you're already wrestling with this, and I think continue to talk about how we develop those thresholds and what that looks like from a district standpoint. Does that make sense?
It does.
Okay, is the board, are we aligned on that piece? Again, I'm echoing what you said, Mark, basically, developing the thresholds. Need to move on that. And again, I think we have some tools. Other, just check them with the board. Any concerns about that? Okay, so that's that piece of it. Now, regarding the outcomes of the book review committee. Again, we have really three options that we can pursue here. We can accept the book review committee outcomes as is. We can accept the outcomes with certain modifications that we ask the administrative team to investigate and or implement, or we can reject the outcomes and request the book review committee reconvene to investigate other options, such as primarily removing the book. The recommendation was to keep the book in the libraries and the classroom and the media center libraries, so that would be to remove the book from those venues. So I need a motion so that we can take a vote. It needs to be a majority vote. We're 3-3. If it's a tie, the outcomes of the book review committee stand, since we don't have a majority, or if it's a 3-3 tie, I should say. But I do need a motion so we can go forward and wrap this up. And again, feel free to add things to the motion. Say, we'd really like to investigate this or that, but we need some direction here. Okay, so Mr. Kaviga has made a motion that the outcomes of the book review committee be reversed. Is there a second to that motion? Mark Davis has supported that motion. Okay, we will do a vote on that motion on the table. Go ahead, Jim. I'm sorry, you're right. Discuss that motion before. Thank you, Jeff.
I guess I just want to be clear on, because Larry said he moves that we remove the book, and Ken, you're referencing the motion, reject the outcomes, request the book review committee reconvene to investigate other options. And I guess I just want to be clear on what the motion is. I guess what the motion is, and secondly, the action that would follow this motion, as opposed to a motion to accept the outcomes with certain modifications that the administrative team is to implement. I'm curious the next steps, depending on which motion passes.
Yeah, it's a great question, because again, we're in a little bit uncharted territory, so we're feeling our way as we go here a little bit. But the outcome per the meeting minutes of April 25, and I think Ms. Taylor mentioned these, the committee unanimously decided to keep the book in the classroom and school libraries. So the motion of this board would be to reject that committee outcome. And but I think the point you're raising is, does that automatically mean it's pulled, or are we saying, committee, please go back and revisit this again and explore other options as to how we move forward or not with the book? And now Larry put a motion on the table to remove the book, which is counter to the outcomes of the book review committee, obviously.
Yeah,
there may be other options that are counter to the outcomes of the book review committee as well. I think that's the point you're raising, Mr. Toll.
It is, and I'll explain the rationale, what's behind the question. I suspect a lot of folks in here have strong personal feelings about this book, and I may as well. But if we're making a motion that automatically removes this book and bans this book from our buildings, I believe that exposes our district to legal exposure, and as a fiduciary on this board, I'm uncomfortable automatically accepting the legal exposure associated with that motion. So I would love to explore things like parental signatures, additional transparency, up to and including better understanding the processes for how books do remove themselves from the shelves outside of board action, and if there's administrative processes that this book or other books naturally go through in that filtering. But I'm not willing to vote in favor of accepting the legal risk that could expose the district to additional litigation by virtue of voting for a motion to ban a single book or any book. I would like there to be processes in place that allow us to have rigor and structure to vet the books that come in, provide great transparency to parents, help parents know the books that are available to kids, help parents know the books that their kids are reading, and be able to give them good visibility into the content of those books as well as any potential concerns about that content. But in terms of just voting for a motion that would automatically start banning books, I don't believe I can do that in good conscience as a fiduciary.
Yeah, I'm actually in the same place as Mr. Tuttle. I don't know, I think you said it well. I don't believe we can do that as a fiduciary. I don't believe we can. I am also very, very uncomfortable in doing that and what that exposes this district to. When there are other options that we've talked about, where we review our process, we continue to work through investigating and determining the threshold of what constitutes excessive sexual violence, and we ask the book review committee and the administrative team to investigate a process of parental consent, as Dr. Hooper mentioned, and that versus going down that path of we're banning this book, we're banning that book.
Can you investigate it?
So that's where I'm at.
Can I put forward a new motion? Is that? Okay, so
correct. There's a motion on the floor. You can vote to amend that motion, and then we'll take a vote on the amendment first.
Can I vote to amend the motion?
You can just say, I'd like to amend the motion.
Okay, I'd like to amend the motion.
Yep.
I would like the motion to be that half of the Yellow Sun is moved to the main library outside of the classroom library, and it requires a parental consent. So the motion would be that the book is removed out of the classroom library to the main library, and it requires a parental consent.
Right down here. And then we will need a second on that motion, on that amendment to the motion. Move from the classroom library to the main library and require parental consent. I'm just taking notes here. Okay, so we have a motion on the floor that half of Yellow Sun be moved from the classroom library to the main library, to the media center library, and that we determine a way in the near term, as we talked about before, of granting, of requesting parental consent before the book is checked out, either in the building or outside the building, I think is what you're saying as well, right? I don't want to put words in your mouth. So we talked about earlier that their kids can go and camp out in the library and read the book. And I think you're saying it's no, you can't just have the book. We're going to just make sure I'm sure you're clear the motion.
It would be in a designated area, and it would require parental consent. But students would still have access to the book. It's about parent transparency.
Parent transparency. Okay, so there's an amendment to the original motion. Is there a second on that amendment? We'll open up for, okay, is there a second on that amendment? Okay, there's no second on that amendment. So then we are back to the original motion, unless there's another amendment that somebody wants to put forward to the motion that Larry put on the table. Okay, so we will take a vote on the original motion, which was to let the book Half a Yellow Sun be removed from the classroom and district libraries. We'll do a roll call vote on that motion. Yes, sir.
You don't get a vote unless it's a tie. Would I be right on that?
No, I'm a voting member of the board. No, I get it. I always vote there. No, I always vote. Yeah. Okay, is there, again, any further discussion around that motion before we take a vote?
Just for clarification, if this vote doesn't pass, there's no reason there can't be a subsequent motion.
That's correct. That's correct. There will be a subsequent motion if this vote doesn't pass. And again, a tie is the motion, the outcome stands. So, Mr. Tuttle.
No.
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 Yes.
Yes.
And yes.
Okay, so that's a tie. So the outcomes of the book review committee stand because we had a tie vote. Now we'll accept other motions, subsequent motions to that.
I'm going to make a motion, clearly out of respect for the work that's done, that we accept the book review committee outcome as it is.
It does. But Jack, Mr. Tuttle had asked a question about can a subsequent motion be made. So I was not sure if somebody wanted to make a subsequent motion. Yes, Dr. Hooper's motion would be more in line with an alternate. So
Can I make the motion again?
you can make the motion again.
I'll make the motion that the book be removed from the classroom library and placed in the media library and require a parental consent.
Okay. Is there a second to that motion? Okay, there's no second to that motion, so that motion does not move forward. Okay, okay, so with that, are there any other motions?
Can I try one more?
You can
Okay,
try
I'll
one
make
more.
one more motion,
Yes, you
that
may.
the book
We'll
be
get the
removed
motion on
from
that.
the classroom library to the main library.
No, the difference is you're not asking for parental consent. Okay, so the motion now on the table is moved from the classroom library to the main library. The part about parental consent is not included in this motion. Just move the book from the classroom library to the main library. Is a second to that motion? Is there a second to that motion? I'm going to second that motion, and then we'll take a roll call vote on that motion, moving the half yellow sun from the classroom to the main library. Then we can discuss, yes. So go ahead, we have a motion and a second.
I'm wondering if Mrs. Taylor can, I know we talked a little bit about the classroom library versus the main library, and I think I heard discussion on both sides of that, that on one hand, the classroom library provides perhaps better opportunity for engagement, control, visibility into what the students are reading versus the main library. But could you talk a little bit about how decisions about accessing books in classroom libraries work and how we could improve parental transparency into that process in situations like this?
I think if we were looking to have it remain in the classroom library, which is what I think I hear you say, for the perspective that the committee discussed around, there's actually more oversight because teachers are aware of what students are checking out in their classroom. So teachers, and this is currently what Nicole Ball, our librarian, is working through as far as classroom libraries, is looking at the processes that teachers currently use. Some have a binder, they use various systems, and so we're working on what that system could look like for the checkout and the oversight of access to books in classrooms, increasing that transparency. So I don't know how to answer your question definitively to say all, but I think there's probably a way that we could figure that out. I think the goal for all of us is increased transparency. So if your question is if the book in the classroom would provide more oversight, I think that is what the committee had discussed. Anything to add to that? Yes.
Not yet. You may ask the question, sorry, but I'm just trying to sort through this in my head here. So I'll propose an amendment to that motion, that the book remain in the classroom library, to the point that you just said, Ms. Taylor, and that the teachers communicate with parents if the student is requesting to read that book. That the teacher, books remain in the classroom library, the teacher reaches out to the parent if the student says, I would like to read Half a Yellow Sun. I'll propose that amendment to the motion, again, given the input that Ms. Taylor just gave us. Is there a second on the amendment? Okay, that's a motion by Ken Hall, seconded by Dawn Sneeden. Questions or comments or discussion?
Can you just say it one more time?
The motion, the amendment is that the book would remain in the classroom library and that the teacher, in a manner to be determined by the teaching staff and Ms. Taylor, would communicate with the parent should the student request to read Half a Yellow Sun. So the student requests to read the book, the teacher reaches out to the parent and says, your child has an interest in Half a Yellow Sun. I would like your consent, likely in writing, again, in a manner to be determined by Ms. Taylor and the staff before that student reads the book.
I'm just processing. Would this, in your mind, look like notification to a parent that a child has selected a book, or a permission slip required to be signed in advance of the book being provided? Because I thought I heard potential concerns with the latter, that it at least need to be vetted with legal to understand our ability to require a permission slip, which seems to be, based on what Dr. Hooper shared, seems to be an available option under at least one legal interpretation.
I was saying request. I am saying request, that the teacher reach out to the parent and say, your son or daughter would like to read this book. I would like your consent as a parent prior to allowing your student to check that book out of my classroom library. And that's what I was saying in the motion, consent versus notification.
And you also said in the process to be determined.
In a process that Ms. Taylor and team would come back to us and say, okay, here's how we could do that. After legal consultation and keeping in mind some of the interpretation, I guess, of some of the legal opinion that's out there. And we know this is untried territory, or I'm not fully fathomed territory, so we're working through it. But that's what I'm proposing.
I think.
Is that what you said?
Can I offer some thinking?
You may, please.
So with the transparency increase with opening up Alexandria, which we are prepared to share with you whenever the 26th is that next Monday? Is that
yes.
Mrs. Ball is prepared to share where we're at in that process and get your continued thinking and feedback on that. So part of that process would be then allowing parents to fill out a form that says, I don't want my child to read this book or that book or this book or that book. So there would be some safeguards in the very near future of just keeping it in the school library as well. So just offering that alternative thinking.
No.
I thought when we talked about Alexandria that to enter all the books in the classroom libraries would take a lot of man hours to complete.
So we're talking about the school library,
Okay.
not the classroom
So
library.
if the book went to the school library based on Alexandria, parents would have the transparency within, let's say, the next 2 months or so.
Even sooner.
A month.
Even
they would know, and a
at
parent
this
could.
point, after the board work session next Monday, once we get your final feedback, we would be ready to go to allow that access on it next week.
And then a parent could say, I don't want my child to read these certain titles. They would have access to all the titles in the main library. There's a form that they could fill out and say, I don't want my child to read this title, this title, this title.
Correct.
And they would know enough of the content?
It opens up the entire catalog in each of our school libraries. So Allward Elementary has a school library catalog, so to say, and so it would open that up for families, and just like the high school main campus library and the freshman campus media center.
Okay.
So I didn't mean to derail, I was just offering that as like an alternative to the process.
So in that context, I mean, we have a motion on the table that the book remain in the classroom, and there's a consent method by which the parent gives consent to read the book. Are you saying, under this situation, would you say, well, move this particular book? Now, we're talking about this particular book, I gotta be careful. Move this particular book to the media center library, and then within a matter of weeks, there would be access, there would be exposure to it, parents would know it's there, and the parent could say, I don't want my child to read that book. Half a Yellow Sun.
Correct. And then staff would enter into the system a pop-up that says, when that student goes to check out that particular book that the parent has filled that form out on, there would be a pop-up on the screen that says, Amy Taylor doesn't have permission to check out this book.
Okay. Are there any further questions?
Do we know the level of overlap in books in the media center versus books in the classroom? I have to suspect there's many books available in both locations, and if a book is in both locations, but as an example, in the media center, a parent has said, well, I don't want my child to be able to check this book out. Does that translate into the classroom as well?
I think that's that messy space that we're in, that we're just trying to move one step towards transparency in the immediate ways that we can, knowing that the classroom libraries is something else that we are problem solving around, and we'll have more information next Monday as well. Pardon me? This particular text, yes, it is. There's 4 copies in classrooms, and there's 18 in the high school media center.
Okay. Are we all clear on that? What, Ms. Taylor? Go ahead, Jeff.
Mark shaking his head no. I think we'll need to reset on the motion.
Okay. All right. So through discussion, we've discerned that using Alexandria, parents will have access to, in the high school and the middle school? High school too? Okay, yes. Parents will have access to titles of books that are in the media center. So if we were to move Half a Yellow Sun to the media center within the matter of a couple of weeks, let's call it October 1, by October 1, parents could pull up and say, oh, Half a Yellow Sun is in the media center, and then they could flag it and say, I don't want my son or daughter to be able to check out that book.
Correct.
Do I have that correct?
Yes.
Okay, that's the, okay. Okay. Any further questions or comments on that? You guys are just like, I got it. Yes, done. And we've got two motions stacked up now, so I'll keep them sorted out my notes here.
So, just to be fair for those who are staffing the libraries, once that process would be implemented, how much of their time will be consumed with that? Or is it an automatic thing when a student logs in?
So the current process, and again, I wish that Mrs. Ball were here because she could certainly speak to this better and will next Monday. However, the process as it's laid out at this time, I believe that it states that once a parent fills out the form that says I don't want my child to read Half of a Yellow Sun, for this example, then the staff would request about 5 days to have that input in the system. And we don't know because we've never done this before. So we don't know what the request level will be for any number of texts that are in our libraries.
Okay. Other questions on this?
Can I get some quick context?
Yes, please.
The excerpt that parents will be able to see has some sample readings of which some were shared tonight. So it's not like all the other excerpts were shared. Does that make sense? So some of the excerpts that Mrs. Virginie read tonight are actually in the reading. So the parent is like, it's not hiding anything, it's right there. I just want to clarify that. I quickly logged into my son doesn't apparently read enough books because it tells you how many books they check last week. That's another conversation.
Okay, so we have, all right, so that's important information, I think, for this board to understand that we're that close to that technology solution. I think that's important. So we have I'm debating whether to amend or whether to move on the first motion. We're just going to move on the first motion that's on the table, then we can take a second motion. Okay, so the motion on the table is Half a Yellow Sun is moved to the classroom library, and that Ms. Taylor and the administrative team, teaching team, develop a way to grant parental consent prior to the book being checked out by a student. That's the motion on the table. There's a motion and there's a second from Ms. Sneeden. We'll take a vote on that motion. Mr. Tuttle. Yes.
And that was to move the book
To the classroom.
to the classroom from the library.
All the books would be in the classroom, and there would be a parental consent required prior to the book being checked out of the classroom.
And for clarification, so if we take this action tonight, this would be action that would be expected to go into immediate effect, so that if this book is in a classroom, that our administrative team and teachers would work very quickly to put a process together so that parents would be able to grant approval. The process on this book or others could be subsequently changed in the future when new technology comes in and this board determines to follow different processes, make additional tools available, but in the spirit of as much transparency as possible in parental involvement in decisions. This decision doesn't lock us into something on this book forever. We could get better at this in the future than even this decision tonight.
Indeed, and that is the goal, is to continue to increase transparency.
And just to clarify, I think you touched on this, the copies that are in the media center libraries, they would move to classrooms.
Where are they now?
Where are the books? There's 4 books in classrooms, and there's 18 in the back of the library where they were still housed during book club.
Good. So they would move into classrooms. And again, with the thinking there is that the teachers know the students best, and they can say, okay, you're looking at this book, that's fine, but we got to get parental consent before. So it puts it under more direct control of the teachers and direct teacher to student interaction. Okay. Make sense? You're still.
I think so. I'm shocked there's no questions from
Okay, and then to your point, we can come back subsequently when technology enables us, which may be sooner than I thought, quite frankly, and revise that, and revise our stance, given technology ways that we can make that more effective by having, now we can take a motion on that tonight too after this motion, or we could just say, get this motion done, get it done, and then we'll come back and we'll revisit this at the next work session / regular meeting, the whole Alexandria thing. That's all right.
Why would we do that?
As opposed to just acting out tonight?
Yeah, just to,
Well,
if we know what's coming with Alexandria, I could put forth a different motion.
You can amend the motion.
You can
amend the motion.
I just don't want to, I mean, if Alexandria is coming in a couple weeks, it seems kind of silly to have to redo all this again. Unless the intent is just to keep it in the classroom.
Are you looking for my feedback?
Well, yeah, what the
I'm
feedback.
looking for parent transparency.
Yeah.
And parental control.
You said that
That's what I'm
within
looking for.
October 1. I'll throw October 1 out there. You can tell me if that's, but by October 1 or October 15, pick a
Mrs. Ball
date.
out there, did I see Mrs. Ball? Yeah, October 1, Mrs. Ball?
Can you repeat that question? I want to make sure I'm clearly answering the question.
Sorry, I hope that this isn't inappropriate.
No.
But, so the question, I believe, do you want to ask?
When does Alexandria come online?
Alexandria can come online as soon as you guys agree.
Okay.
So
It's ready to roll.
So October 1st.
Just for clarification, there is communication you need to send out to parents. There are thousands that are not here tonight. We want to make sure they are aware, they know how to log in. We tested it today for the first time, and it worked. But there's still some, you gotta know how to log in. And it's not the kid logging in, it's the parent logging in as the kid and how they find their student number. And so that's conversation has to happen. Our parents need to be aware, so our principals have to communicate with parents. So it's not just flipping a switch.
We do need a little time, especially with elementary, because we'll have to provide some different communication because PowerSchool access is different for parents at elementary.
So the answer is as soon as possible. We'd like to share it with the board on the 26th and then move forward with communication out. And it's definitely sooner than later. And we think this is a great opportunity to see all the books we have in the library, which I'm looking at it as we speak. There's overlap with several of the books we've talked about with excerpts so parents can find out what their kids have access to and ask our teachers, hey, listen, is this a book I don't want my child to have access to? And our teacher can do it.
Can we get that by October 1?
So our next work session is the 26th, and October 1 is shortly thereafter. So
I'm
and
asking
we definitely
next board meeting.
We can do it as soon as the 26th is done. We don't need a vote to do it, but
Okay.
we want to make sure we share that. And there are some.
I understand.
It could be the 27th if we can get communication out to the principals and vet that, and then there could be all.
Okay,
So
let's
the
solve
answer
it.
Could be the 27th. It could be.
I understand, so we're going to say October 1. And if you get it done sooner, that'd be great, but if we're going to say October 1. So, we can amend the motion. We can amend the motion to say, and I'll propose this amendment. That way you can second it if you agree. I'll propose that we amend the motion, the original motion, to say that all books, that we accept the outcome of the book review committee on this one book, on Half a Yellow Sun. It's all wrong on Half a Yellow Sun. We accept the outcome of the book review committee with the stipulations that all of the books, all the copies of Half a Yellow Sun be moved to Media Center libraries, central libraries, Media Center libraries, however we refer to those, building libraries, and that the Alexandria system, which will come online no later than October 1, will allow parents to see that Half the Yellow Sun is in there and also designate that I do not want my child to sign out half a yellow sun. I'll let Amy get done. Does that, what I just said, make sense?
It does.
Okay, so that's the motion on the table. Okay, we have a second on that motion from Dr. Hooper. On the amended motion, and then we'll vote on the amendment, then we'll go back to the original motion about moving to the classroom. So we'll take action on the amendment first. Are there any further discussions on the amendment?
Well, just one of the sidebar questions I asked Dr. Vanderjack, and I think it's relevant, but the question was, is this book currently checked out by any HPS students?
Fair question.
And based on what is indicated in the Media Center records, it is not. I don't know if we have the equivalent information in classroom libraries, but the only, I guess, if the book is not currently checked out by any students, it's probably a non-issue. If it is checked out, I would hope that that parent is aware of that fact and has had an opportunity to understand if there are any concerns. And, you know, it would, best case is if the parents had a dialogue with the teacher to make sure that it's the best foot for the best choice for them, and that the parent had a say in it.
I am not aware of the classroom copies are currently checked out by students at this time.
Okay, again, I'll say the motion one more time. The motion is, the amended motion is that all copies of Half a Yellow Sun, let me back up. The amended motion is that we accept the outcome of the book review committee, and that with the caveats that all copies of Half a Yellow Sun are to be moved to the building libraries, the Media Center libraries, and that by October 1, the information around Half a Yellow Sun, the title and some excerpts will be provided on the Alexandria system, and that parents will then have the ability to go in and indicate that they do, into that system, and indicate that they do not want their child to be able to check out that book. That's the motion on the table. And we have a second from Dr. Hooper. Any other further discussion? Mr. Tully, would you like to say something?
Just the slow processor tonight.
I know, it's been a long night. You want to Are we ready to take a vote on it? What do you want to think? Okay, we'll start at that. Okay. Mr. Davis? He votes no. Mr. Kaplan? No. I vote yes.
Yes.
I vote yes.
Okay, that motion carries. Okay, now we go back to the original motion that was on the table, that Half a Yellow Sun would be moved to the classroom libraries, and that Ms. Taylor and the teaching staff would determine a way by which parental consent would be given prior to the book being, Half a Yellow Sun being signed out. There was a motion by me and a second by you. Okay, now we'll take action on that motion. Mr. Tuttle.
Sorry, can you reconcile the motion we just passed with this motion?
The motion we just passed says all the books are moving to the Media Center, and the Alexandria system will allow for parental access and permission that their child can check out that book. This first motion that was on the table was all books would move to the classroom, and we would have some sort of written way that parents would be asked to consent for their child to read that book. So we're moving to the Media Center versus the classroom, and we're relying on technology in the Alexandria system to give access to the titles, access to the Half a Yellow Sun title, and parental permission to check the book out, versus in the classroom and a written consent of checking the book out.
I'm just confused what happens if we pass both motions.
I'm really hopeful that's not going to happen here, because I don't know. Huh?
I thought you just passed one. I don't know if you made them.
Well, we may not be able to, yeah, that's a fair point. Good. Yeah, thank you for the Robert's Rules check, Mr. Vanderjack. You're right. We passed the amended motion, so we don't need to act on the first one. Thank you. It has been a long night. Okay, so, you look like you want to say something again. No, him. Your neighbor. We will do a roundtable. Okay.
And maybe now that we've voted on the one motion that we actually passed, if you could make sure we all know what we voted for on the 2 to 6 vote against for the record.
What the motion was?
Yes.
Is that what you're saying?
That we will move all.
I've said it like 5 times.
Okay, yes, I know.
I'm just kidding.
It's good, right?
I'm just kidding. All right, roundtable. Mr. Davis. All set. Mr. Gavin. We took the vote. Yeah, we took the vote. Okay.
Yes, we do.
Doctor.
No, I just want to thank everyone that commented. We just have to come to some common ground, and we need transparency.
Yes.
That's what I'm fighting for.
Yeah, again, I will thank you, Ms. Rucci, for being here, for putting yourself up here as well, for the information that you've shared, which has been beneficial for us. And thank you to the book review committee for all the work, everybody, the hours that you put in to understand the situation. Obviously, it's something we're grappling with, and to our teaching staff as well. In our community, we're wrestling with this. We are trying to find common ground around parental transparency, parental awareness, and academic excellence for our kids, which is something that a goal that we all share. So thank you, everybody, for hanging with us here and for all the work that's gone into this.
Just basically to know what you said. Thank you, Mrs. Rujink. You obviously put a lot of time and effort into this and did the presentation very professionally, and I thank you for doing that. And as well, for the committee members that were here, for being brave to put your face out there. But thank you for your hard work and your commitment to our students too.
I'll just echo the gratitude. Thank you particularly for the parents on the book committee. I know it's an incredible investment of time, and so grateful for your willingness to lean in to support the district and to support all of our students in Hudsonville. Thank you, as well as to the staff. And Mrs. Brujink, we're learning through this. I appreciate that you're helping call the tough questions and bringing them to the board so that we can wrestle with this as a community. We obviously have opportunities to figure out how we're going to wrestle with this on this issue in future and to get better at it. And I'm confident that it's going to be a discussion point to come, and that probably the discussion with this book is not even done in the meetings to come as we continue to learn. And then finally, I just want to say thank you to our teachers who do incredible work for all of our kids every day. And it is absolutely impossible to bring as many books as you have brought into the schools without finding probably a book that could in some way could offend every single parent out there. And we recognize that everybody has unique preferences and tastes, and it's impossible to please everybody. But thank you for providing a diversity of books to challenge our students, to help them as learners. Any takeaway from tonight, I think if there's any frustration, that's on us as a board. That is not on teachers for the great work that you do every day. We owe it to this community, to the district, to help with clear guidelines, clear policy. As I said before, we're better today than we've ever been at any point in the history of this district, but we clearly have opportunity to be even better, to understand how we can be excellent 5 years and 10 years from now. In addition to today. So please join us in that journey and help us wrestle with this and get better at this as a district as we figure out how to even engage parents more in the process. And then finally, just thank you to the audience for sticking around and engaging in the dialogue. I know that there's a lot of parents in the district who weren't able to be here tonight, and we've received emails and other comments as well. And I think more than anything, although you might not agree with the decisions that are made, what is good for us is engagement, and engagement in our kids' education, and that's what I think is common amongst all of us. We all want the absolute best for our kids. We want to protect our kids. We've got an incredible teaching staff who is here to support the kids every day, but at the end of the day, parents know the kids best. And I think involving the parents in that discussion with teachers, we're going to do great things for kids. We're still the best district out there, and we will continue to be.
Absolutely. Dr. Vanderjagt, any notes you want to make? Anything you need to know tonight? Good? Okay. Can I have a motion and a second to adjourn, please? Motion by Larry Kappengut. Support from Chad Tuttle. All in favor? Adjournment? Say yes. We are adjourned. Thank you, everyone.
Remember to vote November 8th.